Chapter 550. There was a dead silence in the room. Only the voice on the TV screen was endlessly praising the friendliness, tolerance, and fraternity of Zhongzhou State. More than 80% of the people in Wulan State were eagerly looking forward to the cooperation between Wulan State and Zhongzhou State. Everything was so beautiful, but the reality was so cruel. News and reality were like two different worlds. The screen was constantly switching. President Li Huaqing, Prime Minister Riker, many high-level officials of Wulan State, a large delegation, the young, sharp, and calm marshal of Zhongzhou State, who was as deep as the starry sky. In the constantly switching pictures, a group of people walked to the black car with a red flag at the airport. Prime Minister Riker took 2 quick steps, bent down, and opened the door for Li Huaqing himself. This scene fell into the eyes of people all over the world. The salute and cheers seemed to pause for a moment. The news also paused for a moment. Li Huaqing smiled and sat in the back of the car. But Prime Minister Riker did not get up. He still kept his bent posture, and waited with a smile on his face. The young marshal who had shocked the world looked at Riker with a smile, and also got into the car. Riker straightened up and carefully closed the door. The news anchor was obviously stuttering. He stuttered a few lines before he regained his composure. The woman in white and Qin Weibai watched the scene quietly. Qin Weibai's eyes were warm and gentle. That kind of deep love was extremely strong, with a kind of unforgettable power. The woman in white was in a trance. Her eyes were bright. When she was in a trance, her cold eyes were like a shaking starry sky. "I'll give him to you, okay?" Qin Weibai said softly. Her voice was very light, but it carried the weight of the world. "Give him to me." The woman in white's voice was clear and soft, with a kind of confusion and complexity, as if it were yesterday. She was indeed beautiful. Perfect. The so-called perfection could be described with any beautiful word, but no beautiful word was enough to describe it. Her face was exquisite and sharp. Every line and every detail of her body was flawless. Dressed in simple yet elegant white clothes, she stood there as if her entire body was glowing. Noble and holy, cold and pure. She was devastatingly beautiful, like a grand and magnificent dream. Her voice was light, clear and soft. "He has always been mine." Qin Weibai was silent for a while. Then he nodded. "That's right, he's yours." She looked into her eyes. "So, do you love him?" A hint of confusion appeared in the woman's sparkling eyes. "I don't know." She moved her feet lightly and sat on the sofa at the side. A book was placed next to the sofa. It was neither thin nor thick, and its cover was a vast expanse of white. Her slender fingers took the book and opened it. The handwriting inside was not printed, but handwritten. The handwriting was delicate, and every stroke was carefully written. She lowered her head to look at the book in her hands, lost in thought. "Everyone has a story, so everyone is a story," Qin Weibai said softly. "Putting everyone's story into one story is the whole world. But this is not my world." The woman raised her head and looked straight into Qin Weibai's eyes. "But Tianlan is here," Qin Weibai said softly. The woman stopped talking and lowered her head again, as if she was trying to think. "Don't think about it." Qin Weibai chuckled. "Perfect. You love him." Her tone was brief but extremely sure. The woman raised her head and seemed to be a little dissatisfied. "Why?" "Because I love him." Qin Weibai said calmly. "You will naturally protect what I love. I'm not your shadow, and I'm not your puppet." There was a touch of anger in the woman's cold eyes. Qin Weibai looked at her quietly for a long time. The woman met her eyes without dodging. "I'm sorry." Qin Weibai didn't know how much time had passed. It felt like a minute, but it also felt like a lifetime. Qin Weibai spoke softly with an apologetic tone. There was a flash of fear in the eyes of the woman in white. She shook her head subconsciously and stammered. "No, no. You are indeed not my shadow, nor are you my puppet." Qin Weibai said softly. "At least not now. But I am your destiny, and also your guilt. This has long been decided." The woman's breathing gradually quickened. She suppressed her inner emotions, but all her emotions seemed to have reached the critical point. She began to collapse, and her voice also sounded like she was about to cry. "Why, who knows?" Qin Weibai walked up to her, reached out and gently stroked her soft black hair. She whispered, "In fact, it's not bad. At least, you have the qualification to be by his side." A colorful light lit up the room. The sword intent in the nothingness was extremely soft. The soft sword intent wrapped around the woman in white, and then Qin Weibai. It seemed to be comforting, but it didn't know who to comfort. The sword body turned slightly, and the slight sound of the sword seemed to be a sigh. The two of them were completely enveloped in the colorful light. One stood and one sat. Both were perfect and flawless. Unparalleled charm? Unparalleled? There was a sudden knock on the door. The woman in white was shocked and subconsciously wanted to stand up to avoid it. "Sit down," Qin Weibai whispered. "Mr. Lin is not an outsider." The woman in white hesitated and slowly sat down. Qin Weibai sat beside her, looked at the door and said, "Please come in." Lin Fengting walked in from the outside with a chuckle. He saw Qin Weibai and the woman in white sitting on the sofa at the first moment. Even Lin Fengting, who had a strong will and had seen too many bizarre things in his life, was stunned for a moment and dazzled. He shook his head subconsciously and carefully looked at the space where the two of them were. He was dumbfounded, and his eyes became extremely strange for a moment. "Qin, this. Lin Fengting's eyes kept glancing around, and he couldn't say a word for a while. He stuttered several times before he managed to calm down. He took a deep breath and said, "This is. Let me introduce you." Qin Weibai stood up and whispered, "This is Mr. Lin Fengting, the current patriarch of the Lin clan, and my most respected elder." She paused and said, "The only one." The woman in white stood up subconsciously and bowed slightly to Lin Fengting. In a short time, Lin Fengting's forehead was covered with cold sweat. He waved his hand randomly and stared at the woman in white without caring about politeness. Qin Weibai looked at the woman in front of her with a smile and whispered, I have my own name." The woman in white suddenly said, "At least now, I have the right to use my own name." The corner of Lin Fengting's mouth twitched, and he looked confused. Qin Weibai nodded and said quietly, "Her name is Xianyan." The family name was not unimportant. But standing in the woman's current position, she had no family name. Xianyan, this name was really worthy of the name. Lin Fengting was silent for a long time, then slowly exhaled and whispered, No wonder. He looked at Qin Weibai with complicated eyes and said, "It's her?" Qin Weibai nodded. Lin Fengting didn't know what to say for a moment. He suddenly wanted to drink, but there was no wine here. He had to light a cigarette, take a deep breath, and then said with emotion, "You are simply a miracle." Qin Weibai smiled. The woman in white reached out and took out a piece of gauze. She covered her face with the gauze and left the room with light steps. "She is your real trump card, isn't she?" Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai, and no one knew what kind of emotion was contained in his tone. "Yes." Qin Weibai nodded calmly. Lin Fengting was silent for a while. He seemed to suddenly think of something and said, I just remembered that flaming fire is waiting outside. It seems that she wants to make trouble, and she is full of murderous intent." As he said this, he subconsciously wanted to turn around. Qin Weibai had turned on the monitor outside the door and said calmly, "It's okay." A sword light lit up on the monitor outside the door. The sword light was cold and sharp. Flaming fire held the long sword in her hand, and the blade fell steadily on the neck of the woman in white. The supermaster who had the closest relationship with Qin Weibai in Samsara Palace was expressionless, but her eyes were full of murderous intent. "Who the hell are you?" After the woman in white left Qin Weibai, her whole aura seemed to change quietly and became extremely quiet. She looked at flaming fire calmly and said with a chuckle, "Who do you think I am? You've seen me before." "I did see you before, but I didn't really see you until today." There was a suppressed rage and panic in Flaming Fire's voice. "Who the hell are you? What do you think?" The woman in white smiled playfully. "Do you really think that I dare not kill you?" Flaming Fire's voice was cold. "Do you really dare to?" The woman in white asked back. Flaming Fire's eyes became sharp, and the long sword suddenly pressed down. The blade cut the skin of the woman in white in an instant, but there was no blood. The white clothes in front of her twisted in a trance and finally became illusory. Flaming Fire raised her head and looked at the door. 10 meters away from her, the woman in white was standing there. What Flaming Fire had just seen was an illusion. Flaming Fire took a deep breath, and her plump chest rose and fell slightly. The woman in white glanced at her and said blandly, "Your sword is good, but your vision is poor." She turned to leave and said slowly, "Let me introduce myself. I am Xian Yan." Lin Fengting, who saw this scene through the monitor screen, did not speak for a long time. Qin Weibai took the initiative to say, "What can I do for you, sir?" Lin Fengting's heart was in a mess. He managed to sort out his thoughts and said slowly, "Flaming Fire just said that it's about to start?" "Yes." Qin Weibai poured a cup of tea for Lin Fengting. "It's time. But in the current situation, where do we start?" Lin Fengting asked. "The situation in Eastern Europe should naturally start from Eastern Europe," Qin Weibai said calmly. Lin Fengting was silent for a while, and then tentatively said, "The chaos in Eastern Europe began with the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance. The base alliance is not far from here. Their headquarters can be said to be here." Qin Weibai whispered, "Since the chaos started here, it will end here. Let's start with the Polar Ground Alliance." Lin Fengting took a deep look at her, and did not speak. "If I say that Sir is my most respected elder, will you believe me?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked. "Of course not." Lin Fengting laughed. "Boss Qin, what kind of person do you think so highly of me? There must be a reason. Because of your friendship, because of the saint of the Lin clan." Qin Weibai finished a cup of tea, stood up and said slowly, "I don't know the result of this battle. I want to ask you something." Lin Fengting nodded. "Go ahead. If I die, everything in the Lin clan for 20 years can be handed over to Xian Yan. I only ask for a cemetery. Then my ashes can be buried on the hill behind the flowing light waterfall of the Lin clan." Qin Weibai whispered. Lin Fengting's face changed, and his eyes were a little bitter. "If I am lucky enough to survive." Qin Weibai laughed. "At that time, please take me away, sir." "Leave. Leave." It was normal to leave. Qin Weibai's voice was also very ordinary, but Lin Fengting heard a touch of determination. Lin Fengting stood there without saying a word. "I'll take it as a yes," Qin Weibai whispered. She left the room with the sword in the void. "Where are you going?" Lin Fengting asked. "Reki City." Qin Weibai's voice was calm and distant. Lin Fengting walked to the window and looked at the night rain outside. Under the polar night, whether it was noon or late at night, it was night and heavy rain outside the window. The darkness gradually became deeper. Lin Fengting could already see the end of everything. That was the end of the old era. It was coming to an end. There must be an end. Chapter 551. The rain beat on the car window, and the sound was messy and hurried. The atmosphere in the car was depressing and dull. Li Huaqing looked at the scenery outside the window with a smile. Through the rain, the scenery was blurred, and his eyes were a little blurred. "Your Highness, Mr. President, shall we go straight back to the hotel?" Riker sat in the passenger seat and turned around to ask. Under normal circumstances, when the president of Zhongzhou State visited Wulan State, he naturally had to stay in the office of the president temporarily. But now the office of the president had become a ruin, and only Wang Tianzong's room was still intact. Wulan State could only temporarily arrange the distinguished guests of Zhongzhou State in the hotel. Li Huaqing sensitively noticed the order of Riker's address. He smiled and said softly, "I'm a guest. I'm here for a lot of things but not much. Mr. Prime Minister, we must have a good chat when we have time." "Of course." Riker nodded quickly, and thoughts kept turning in his mind. Li Huaqing only had 5 days to stay in Wulan State, and the other 2 days had to travel to the other 4 countries. Time was very tight. This was his first day. Li Huaqing had a reason to do a lot of things, such as arranging a meeting with the high level of Wulan State, and signing the agreement as soon as possible. He also wanted to see Wang Tianzong, who was imprisoned in the office of the president, or visit the Snowdance Corps. In addition, Wulan State also prepared a very high-level banquet. The theme of the banquet was the future development of Eastern Europe. As Zhongzhou State's position in Wulan State gradually stabilized, The general trend of the whole Eastern Europe gradually stabilized. Everyone knew that if they wanted to survive in Eastern Europe and live well in the future, they had to depend on Zhongzhou State. Therefore, at this banquet, Wulan State sent invitations to countless families and groups throughout Eastern Europe. At the same time, the delegation brought by Li Huaqing also participated in the banquet. This was the first large-scale banquet held by the forces of Zhongzhou State and Eastern Europe. To some extent, it could almost determine the pattern of Eastern Europe for at least decades. This could be said to be the most important thing. But the funny thing was that the time of the banquet had not been accurately set yet. Riker had to wait for Li Huaqing's nod. He thought for a moment and said tentatively, "Mr. President, here's the thing. Wulan State has prepared a very grand welcome banquet. Tonight, I don't know. Put it off for the time being." Li Tianlan suddenly said, "Tomorrow night." Rick was stunned. He subconsciously wanted to nod, but he felt that something was wrong. He could only continue to look at Li Huaqing, but his eyes were obviously a little perfunctory. Li Huaqing's smile remained unchanged. He looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "Tianlan, do you have a different opinion?" Li Tianlan looked at the wind and rain outside the window. Under the wind and rain, Reki City was desolate. On that day, his sword lit up in front of the Caesar Hotel and tore up half of the city. The sword was 10,000 meters long, and the damage left in the city had not been repaired yet. At this time, Wulan State was much more lively, but there were still some traces of the war. The Snowdance Corps has 20,000 people. Li Tianlan said calmly, "From I'm to here, more than 2,000 soldiers have fallen. We marched all the way, covering a distance of hundreds of miles, and stained with blood all the way. On the night we beat back the dark forces, more than 1,200 soldiers of the Snowdance Corps fell in this city. We can achieve what we have now because the Snowdance Corps has paid nearly 4,000 lives." Rick's face was a little pale, and he was fidgeting. Li Tianlan's voice became calmer and calmer. Whether it was an invincible realm expert or the coalition forces of other countries, the Snowdance Corps has never retreated. We fought all the way from I'm to Reki City. There was no deserter in the Snowdance Corps. They all died in a dignified battle, so they are all martyrs. This city and this country will be engraved with the brand of Zhongzhou State in the future. But no one should forget everything here. It has been dyed red by the blood of the martyrs of Zhongzhou State. He turned to look at Li Huaqing and said calmly, "Mr. President, you shouldn't forget." Li Huaqing was not embarrassed. Instead, he looked solemn. He looked at Li Tianlan, nodded solemnly and said, "I think I know what I should do today." He glanced at Rick and said gently, "Mr. Prime Minister, let's go to the station of the Snowdance Corps now and inform the rear vehicles. All the members of the delegation have to go." Rick smiled bitterly and nodded. In fact, when the president of Zhongzhou State visited Wulan State, everything was arranged in advance. However, there was a small disagreement between Rick and Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's meaning was very simple. On the first day of Li Huaqing's arrival in Wulan State, he had to visit the Snowdance Corps. The ashes of nearly 4,000 martyrs had not yet been buried, and the star flag of Zhongzhou State had already flown up in the Hero Square in the center of Reki City. For Li Tianlan, it was his most important thing to bury thousands of martyrs. However, Rick also had his own pressure. Now the entire top management of Wulan State, and even the interest class of the whole Eastern Europe, hoped that the dinner could be held as soon as possible. The pressure Rick was under could be imagined. After weighing the pros and cons, he put the dinner first and the memorial service later. In this way, Li Tianlan might not like it, but Rick believed that he could explain it. However, Rick glanced at Li Tianlan and sighed softly in his heart. He picked up the walkie-talkie and began to instruct the motorcade to turn around. The Snowdance Corps was still temporarily stationed in the parade square in front of the office of the president. When the luxurious motorcade drove into the square, all the top management of the Snowdance Corps had arrived. The soldiers, injured or not, were all gathered in the square. When Li Huaqing got out of the car, there were only a little more than 10,000 elites stationed in Reki City now. They raised their hands and saluted at the same time. The wind and rain were messy, but a whistling sound broke out in the square because of the tens of thousands of people raising their hands. In an instant, It seemed that even the wind and rain between heaven and earth had become fierce. Li Tianlan followed Li Huaqing. The top management of the Snowdance Corps came over. Cool breeze and drifting clouds stood on the left and right. Standing in the middle of them was Tribulation, who had just come out of the hospital. Tribulation's body was still weak and his face was pale, but his body was as sharp as a sword. Li Huaqing shook hands with him and said gently, "How's your injury?" "I'm fine." Tribulation's voice was clear and indifferent. Such an occasion was obviously not suitable for detailed discussion. He pointed to the temporary high platform in the center of the square and said softly, "President, please." Li Huaqing took a deep breath, looked at the soldiers of Zhongzhou State who raised their hands and saluted him, and strode to the high platform. There were no flowers on the high platform, only a microphone. Li Huaqing stood on it, and was instantly drenched by the wind and rain. Li Huaqing held the microphone, his eyes calm and dignified. The next second, his voice resounded throughout the square and the whole world. "You are all heroes of Zhongzhou State, the pride of Zhongzhou State. I am Li Huaqing. Today, at this moment, I promise you in the name of the President of Zhongzhou State that Zhongzhou State will never let down any martyr or soldier. In this war, whether survivors or victims, Zhongzhou State is proud of you. Today, I am here with you, to send all the martyrs on their way." In the wind and rain, Li Huaqing's voice was clear and loud. This speech of less than 10 minutes had no passion, no blood, only calm and solemnity. In the square, countless members of the Snowdance Corps began to turn and walk to the Hero Square in the center of the city. Li Huaqing walked down the high platform, looked at the empty office of the president, and looked at the only intact room in sight. He was silent for a while. "Let's go and see Tianzong." He looked at Li Tianlan and said calmly. It was not a question. Li Tianlan nodded and led the way. At the funeral of the Snowdance Corps, there had to be a president and a sword emperor. There had to be a sword emperor. Wang Tianzong was still practicing calligraphy. Everything outside seemed to have no effect on him. He stood in front of the table with a pen, so focused. When Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing came in, he did not look up and just said casually, "You're here." "I just arrived." Li Huaqing looked around with a chuckle and said, "It seems that you're doing well here. It's good to be able to cultivate one's body and mind." Wang Tianzong spoke calmly and wrote calmly. A lot of rice paper had been scattered in the room. It was densely packed, and the strokes were light and restrained. At the end of each stroke, there was a character. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the countless rice papers full of handwriting. There was clearly no sword intent around him, but the power in each stroke made him feel as if he couldn't breathe. His gaze fell on the last piece of calligraphy. Wang Tianzong's last stroke was very short. "How's my handwriting?" he asked softly. "Good handwriting." Li Tianlan did not hesitate. He nodded directly and said affirmatively. "Good handwriting?" Wang Tianzong smiled and suddenly waved the pen in his hand. One word was like a sword. In an instant, Wang Tianzong seemed to wave a sword in front of Li Tianlan. Everything in front of him disappeared in front of Li Tianlan. The house, the president, and the sword emperor completely disappeared. There was only one sword left in his sight. There was no sword energy or killing intent. It was light and dignified, pure sword. Li Tianlan suddenly closed his eyes. His eyes seemed to be stimulated by something, and tears kept flowing. Wang Tianzong's voice sounded in his ear. "Your sword is very important to my achievements today." Li Tianlan laughed self-deprecatingly. That night, he and Wang Tianzong fought across half of the city, but the fundamental purpose was to mislead Wang Tianzong. But Wang Tianzong was not misled. Instead, he completed the sword and completely completed his sword intent. Li Tianlan opened his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's eyes were gentle and deep, like the sky and the sea, unfathomable. "You flatter me," Li Tianlan said calmly. "That's the truth." Wang Tianzong turned back, picked up the calligraphy and said quietly, "In return, this calligraphy is for you." Li Tianlan quietly looked at the calligraphy in Wang Tianzong's hand. There was rice paper everywhere in the room, and Wang Tianzong's notes were everywhere. But the notes were not the same. In other words, they were decreasing. Wang Tianzong's first stroke was full of hundreds of words, and the fewer the words were at the end. At this moment, there were only 2 sentences left in Wang Tianzong's hand. Each stroke was simple but majestic. The signature was Beihai Tianzong. There was no surname. With Beihai, there was no need for a surname. Li Tianlan stared at the handwriting in front of him. 2 simple sentences, but they showed the spirit of the Sword Emperor. The unparalleled sword in the world. I am the most ambitious person in history. Between the strokes, the sword intent formed a storm and completely swallowed Li Tianlan. I am the most ambitious person in history. What a peerless sword. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he said in a hoarse voice, "Perfect." Chapter 552. For Wulan State, the Hero Square in Reki City had been endowed with a lot of sacred meanings since the founding of the country. This was the resting place of heroes, and the origin of countless epic legends. There were countless monuments in the huge Hero Square, and each monument represented a soul-stirring story. This was the most sacred place in Reki City, and it was also the cemetery chosen by Li Tianlan for the victims of the Snowdance Corps. It was raining heavily and the sky was dark. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps had completely surrounded the Hero Square. There were 3 extremely tall flagpoles in the center of the square. The star flag of Zhongzhou State was hung on the highest flagpole. Even in the heavy rain, it was still flying. A little lower than the star flag was the flag of Wulan State, and the flagpole on the left side of the star flag was still empty. Cool breeze and drifting cloud, dressed in military uniform, stood under the flagpole, holding a scarlet military flag and standing solemnly. The usually quiet and elegant Hero Square had been completely replaced by a warm scarlet color. The intense scarlet color covered the center of the square, and even the monuments around it had become pale under the illumination of the intense color. That was the military flag of the Snowdance Corps, which was made by Prime Minister Rieker himself. The pattern of the military flag was simple and clear. An extremely sharp golden long sword was outlined on the scarlet base. Golden spots of light were dancing around the long sword, like flying snow, flames, and falling blood. This was the military flag that Wulan State had started making a few days ago. It was nearly thousands of meters long and wide. At this time, the huge scarlet flag was spread on the Hero Square. This scarlet color seemed to be integrated with heaven and earth. All the experts above the fire-flaming realm of the Snowdance Corps gathered around the huge military flag. There were more than 10,000 soldiers of the Snowdance Corps, and there were actually many experts in the fire-flaming realm. However, the military flag, which almost covered the entire square, was so big that even if all the experts in the fire-flaming realm stood there, they still seemed extremely sparse. But in terms of function, hundreds of experts in the fire-flaming realm were enough. In the strong wind and heavy rain, every expert in the fire-flaming realm was controlling his own power. The surging heat waves completely dispelled the chill between heaven and earth, and evaporated the rain. In the rainy weather, the whole square was dry. The military flag of the Snowdance Corps was still scarlet and unstained by dust. Under this huge military flag, the ashes of nearly 4,000 people who had sacrificed their lives were quietly placed. The ashes were light, but for Zhongzhou State, they weighed more than anything else. From the high-level members of the Snowdance Corps to the soldiers, all stood quietly in every corner of the square. There was no wind or rain, no cold or sound here. It was so quiet that it seemed to be frozen. When Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan came to the Hero Square, they saw such a quiet and almost eternal scene. Wang Tianzong, who had walked out of the office of the president, stood not far from the two of them. Looking at this scene, he narrowed his eyes. I should have come here earlier. Li Huaqing watched this scene quietly. He was silent for a long time before he spoke softly. It's not too late. Li Tianlan looked at the military flag below and said calmly, Thank you. Li Huaqing took a deep look at Li Tianlan and said, Thank you for letting me come here. As the president of Zhongzhou State, it would be a sin for me to come here 1 minute late, let alone 1 day late. A hero's soul must not be desecrated. He looked at the Hero Square, which was so calm that it was almost frozen, and said in a deep voice, I only know that many people here died unjustly. Li Tianlan said blandly. They are the most elite soldiers of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State is the most powerful country in the world, so they are the most elite soldiers in the world. Such soldiers should die on the real battlefield, in the fight with other forces. That's a worthy death. Li Huaqing did not speak. Li Tianlan's tone was low. But some of them are not. They did die in the war. But in the war, some people forgot their position. Mr. President, does it make sense to die like this? Li Huaqing still did not speak. He could not express his opinion. The Wang family of Beihai had a strong foundation. However, the devil troop had always been the deepest hidden trump card of the Wang family of Beihai. No one could even have definite evidence to prove that the devil troop did exist. But there was no doubt that they were powerful. The trial day happened overnight. The devil troop seriously injured Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights, Sitit Songyue, destroyed the holy punishment of Void, and killed Kasrotter, the god of war of Star State. No matter what the process was, the results and achievements were real. They were extremely brilliant. Everyone was shocked by the incredible combat capability of the devil troop. But only a few people recalled that when the devil troop created such a result that night, how many troops and allies of Zhongzhou State died in the hands of the devil troop. But there was no evidence. Even now, no one could prove that the devil troop belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. On the surface, Wang Tianzong was imprisoned by Li Tianlan in the office of the president that night. The power of the Wang family of Beihai did not appear on any side of the battlefield. Under such circumstances, even if Li Huaqing was dissatisfied, how could he express his opinion? Li Tianlan did not expect Li Huaqing to express his opinion. He just looked ahead and said calmly, "I will investigate it to the end. These are my soldiers. As long as I am alive, I will give them an explanation. My position is in Zhongzhou State and the Snowdance Corps. I will make anyone who targets the Snowdance Corps pay a heavy price." Li Huaqing subconsciously glanced at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong stood aside, looking as usual. Li Tianlan did not say much and walked to the huge military flag in the square. Behind the three of them, more and more people appeared. Men and women, old and young, there were nearly hundreds of people. These were the members of the delegation brought by Li Huaqing this time. And they would also become the backbone of dividing the interests of the 5 Eastern European countries. Their achievements today were inextricably linked to the sacrifices of the Snowdance Corps. It was reasonable for them to come. On the other side of the crowd, Riker led a group of high-level officials of Wulan State and quietly watched Li Tianlan, who was getting closer and closer. Riker, who now held the power of the president as the prime minister, had a complicated look in his eyes. Looking at the ashes under the military flag, at Li Tianlan, and at the countless monuments on the hero square around him, he suddenly felt sad. Not for Zhongzhou State, not for the Snowdance Corps, but for himself and Wulan State. Maybe there was no Wulan State anymore. The real Wulan State would become a thing of the past from today on. Just like this hero square, the legends would be forgotten little by little. This place would become the resting place of new heroes, the land of heroes of Zhongzhou State. Maybe in a few months or years, the stories on every monument here would disappear, and some well-known heroic deeds would be erased from the textbooks of Wulan State. The heroic deeds of the Snowdance Corps would appear in new textbooks, and in various media and public opinions. In another 20 or 30 years, these ashes would become real heroes, and the heroes who really belonged to Wulan State would be completely annihilated. It was so cruel. In a real invasion, the losers would be robbed not only of their interests, but also of their culture, traditions, ideas, and even beliefs. Everything would be obliterated, replaced, and completely subverted silently and quietly. Riker walked to Li Tianlan's side and said with some difficulty, "Your Highness, shall we start now?" Li Tianlan nodded. Riker turned around and made a gesture. In front of the flagpole in the center of the square, Cool Breeze, who was holding the flag of the Snowdance Corps, suddenly raised the flag in his hand. The flag slowly rose in Drifting Cloud's hand. The national anthem of Zhongzhou State resounded throughout the hero square, throughout Reki City, and throughout Wulan State. At this moment, in every city and every corner of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, schools, businesses, governments, everyone was mourning and praying. The lingering national anthem was loud and passionate. The elites of the Snowdance Corps in the square moved. The huge military flag on the ground was lifted little by little. The soldiers of the Snowdance Corps carefully picked up the urns one by one and put them into the pit dug nearby. The content of the monument on the square would be gradually replaced, and the lives of all the victims would be engraved on the monument. Li Tianlan and even Li Huaqing picked up the cinerary casket and gently put it in. The wind and rain continued. The singing became more and more majestic. Tens of thousands of soldiers of the Snowdance Corps raised their guns at the same time. The sound of gunfire roared in the city and surged into the sky. Li Tianlan, dressed in a marshal's uniform, was the first to pick up the shovel and silently buried the earth in the roar of gunfire. The national anthem slowly stopped. The sound of gunfire disappeared. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps began to gather together again. The military song that once belonged to the Border Control Corps sounded in the square. The tune was leisurely, not sad, only a touch of pride and nostalgia. There were new graves everywhere in the Hero Square. Perhaps a long time later, the new graves here would also become flat and become a square again. But as long as Li Tianlan was still alive, as long as the Li family was still there, it would always be the most sacred place in the whole of Wulan State, and even the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. In the singing, the old era of Wulan State was completely buried. Li Huaqing, with a solemn face, raised his hand to salute. All the soldiers of the Snowdance Corps raised their hands to salute at the same time. Wang Tianzong also raised his hand. Only Li Tianlan didn't. Under everyone's gaze, Li Tianlan slowly took a step forward. There was a vast expanse of new graves. His eyes were in a trance for a moment, and his knees bent slightly. In the eyes of the world, he knelt down in front of the new graves. In an instant, tens of thousands of soldiers of the Snowdance Corps suddenly fell silent. Li Huaqing's face changed slightly, and he subconsciously said, "Marshal Li, what are you doing?" Wang Tianzong's eyes had narrowed tightly. Li Tianlan shook his head and said calmly, "As I said, some brothers here died unjustly. Today, I swear in front of all the brothers that some people have to pay the price for doing something wrong. I will seek justice for them, and let them die a worthy death." He lowered his body and his head hit the rain-soaked floor heavily. Once, twice, 3 times. Heaven and earth were silent. All the soldiers of the Snowdance Corps looked at this scene in a daze. At this moment, there was no Li Huaqing or Wang Tianzong in their eyes. There was only the figure kneeling and kowtowing. That was their marshal. Li Tianlan kowtowed 3 times heavily and slowly got up. Wang Tianzong's face suddenly changed. He raised his head and looked around. Li Tianlan straightened up. As if heaven and earth corresponded, light suddenly appeared in the dark sky. The quiet light enveloped the whole square. It was a riot of colors. The light appeared from all directions and gathered toward Li Tianlan crazily. Li Tianlan raised his head and was in a daze. He subconsciously stretched out his palm. The outstretched palm seemed to be pressed down by something in the nothingness. In an instant, the colorful light surged and shot wildly. Endless colorful light rushed out of the light and went straight up into the sky. The wind and rain all over the sky dissipated. Li Tianlan stood there. His hand grasped a rainbow, vast and boundless, incomparably dazzling. It was like a miracle. Chapter 553. Even if Wulan State and even Reki City disappeared from the world a long time later, the scene in the Hero Square on the afternoon of August 23rd would leave its own color in the long history of the flow of time. The colorful light surged wantonly, almost covering the entire square. The rainbow connecting the heaven and the earth bloomed in Li Tianlan's hands. At this moment, his whole body was shining. This was a miracle. It would also become a legend in the future. Everyone was staring at this scene in a daze. The light that covered the heavy rain was extremely gorgeous, mysterious, and full of sharp majesty. No one could explain such a scene. Because of the unknown, everyone was in awe. Was it a blessing from heaven? Was it destiny? Was it destiny? This scene, which was filled with a mysterious flavor, filled everyone's heart. Apart from shock, it brought them more shock. Wang Tianzong did not look at the rainbow in Li Tianlan's hands. His body turned slowly, and he stared intently in all directions. Naturally, he would not think that these lights were a gift from heaven. The light was still sharp in the slight flow. All the light was sword light. The sword light was sharp but did not hurt people. It silently spread all over the square. This was not something that a human could do at all. Wang Tianzong was sure of this. He could not do it himself, and no one could do it. Everything in front of him was like the light of a sword itself. If such a sword existed, what kind of sword would it be? Wang Tianzong frowned. The sword light kept lingering in his sight. He seemed to detect a familiar taste, but it was hard to describe. He glanced at the snowdance core around him. The snowdance core was silent. Everyone was looking at Li Tianlan quietly. At this moment, there was no one in their eyes, not even the sword light. From Wang Tianzong's sight, the eyes of the snowdance core were all without the slightest rational fanaticism and firmness. Wang Tianzong's heart sank. In the end, he remained silent. At the same time, Wang Tianzong was silent, but Gu Xingyun, who was far away in Zhongzhou State, could not help bursting out. Preposterous. Simply preposterous. What's the meaning of this? Li Tianlan is the commander of the Snowdance Corps and the marshal of Zhongzhou State. The Snowdance Corps is the elite corps of Zhongzhou State, not the private army of the Li family. Why does he kneel? Why does he kneel? Was he qualified? Buying people's hearts, building up troops in Eastern Europe, and having wild ambitions, you should be punished. In the cold and spacious hall of Kunlun City, Gu Xingyan looked at the picture on TV and roared hysterically. His eyes were scarlet, and he stared at Li Tianlan as if he wanted to swallow him alive. To win people's hearts, that bitch Qin Weibai is helping him behind the scenes. If he kneels down together with her, it's impossible for us to fight for the Snowdance Corps. Gu Qianchuan stood beside Gu Xingyan with a pale face and said in a gloomy tone. After he escaped from Beijiang, he did not return to Kunlun City until yesterday. After the battle with Li Tianlan, the injuries he had suppressed relapsed in Beijiang. Now Gu Qianchuan was not even as good as Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun stared at the TV and was silent. Li Tianlan's kneeling was completely inappropriate. Through the TV, Gu Xingyun didn't know what Li Tianlan said, but no matter what he said, his kneeling seemed to have ulterior motives in the eyes of others. However, the colorful light that rose into the sky later gave this matter a great mythical color. It was not until this moment that Gu Xingyan finally noticed something from Li Tianlan's every move. That was luck. Li Tianlan's every move, everything, and all the results represented the majestic and almost irresistible luck. Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan looked at each other and saw deep helplessness in each other's eyes. Do you still have strength left? Gu Qianchuan suddenly asked. Gu Xingyan was stunned, and then he shook his head with a bitter smile. What's the point? The moment Li Tianlan knelt down, Gu Xingyan really had a desperate desire to kill him. His kneeling made the Snowdance Corps completely surrender. But in the end, no matter how strong the Snowdance Corps was, there were less than 20,000 people now. What made Gu Xingyan most nervous was the signal brought by Li Tianlan's kneeling, and the relationship between him and the Dongqing clan. Now there was definite news that the Dongqing clan had completely put its future on Li Tianlan. Even Zhou Yuanshan, who was likely to reach the top, would wholeheartedly assist Li Tianlan. If Zhou Yuanshan reached the top 20 years later, he could guarantee the prestige of the giant group for decades to come. But if Li Tianlan became the chosen one, he could make the Dongqing clan the second Wang family of Beihai. The Dongqing clan naturally knew which was more important. Li Tianlan's kneeling showed his attitude toward the Dongqing clan, which was undoubtedly what many people in the giant group liked. It also meant that it would be smoother for Li Tianlan to take over the authority of Dongqing Wudi in the future. A Li family that controlled the giant group might not be as powerful as the Li family in its heyday, but its strength was directly related to Li Tianlan's strength. Li Tianlan now had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. What if he officially broke through to the Invincible Realm in a few years? With the potential and combat capability that Li Tianlan showed now, once he officially entered the Invincible Realm, Gu Xingyun did not dare to say that he would be his opponent even without stabilizing his realm. Gu Qianchuan asked him if he still had strength left at this time. Undoubtedly to let Gu Xingyan kill him at all costs. Even if I have strength left, can I really sneak into Reki City and kill him? After all, he is the marshal of Zhongzhou State. Gu Xingyun said. Why not? Gu Qianchuan said quietly. Gu Xingyun raised his head in astonishment. In his sight, Gu Qianchuan's pale face was calm. Gu Xingyun also understood. Why couldn't he kill him? Now Gu Xingyun was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm. Even if he was seriously injured, his realm was there. As long as he had strength left, he could kill him. As long as Gu Xingyun was willing to pay the price. The god of war of Zhongzhou State killed the marshal of Zhongzhou State. In any case, Gu Xingyun could not escape the responsibility. Even if he did not have to pay with his life, he was bound to be imprisoned for life. But if Li Tianlan died, Kunlun City would have time. Even if Kunlun City lost Gu Xingyun, it still had Gu Qianchuan. Kunlun City had been rooted in Zhongzhou State for more than 20 years, and the Special Warfare Group had gradually become mature. As long as there were another 20 years, even if the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State were completely neutral, Kunlun City would have the confidence to protect itself in front of a behemoth like the Wang family of Beihai. Therefore, Gu Qianchuan asked Gu Xingyun to sacrifice himself. For Kunlun City, it's a matter of life and death. Gu Qianchuan laughed at himself. He had no strength left, and his realm was not high enough. Even if he could move, he would not be Li Tianlan's opponent. Gu Xingyun was silent for a long time, then shook his head and said, I can't move. Gu Qianchuan looked at him and did not speak for a long time. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the light in his hand. Others were shocked, angry, admiring, and thoughtful. But his whole consciousness had been completely occupied by the sword light in front of him. The sword light with extremely pure sword intent wrapped him up. The light formed by the sword intent, and the sword chi appeared in an extremely calm manner. It was completely unfolded in front of him. It was so strange and so familiar. It seemed familiar. Li Tianlan felt the emotion. It was light and strong emotion. It was joy, intimacy, excitement, approval, docility, and dependence. The sword light in front of him seemed to be alive, constantly jumping in Li Tianlan's hand. He had a sword in his hand. Li Tianlan could not see what the sword looked like, but he could clearly feel that the sword seemed to whisper something in his hand. This is the real peerless sword. Wang Tianzong's voice sounded beside him. Sword Emperor, who had been incompatible with the Snowdance Corps, walked to Li Tianlan's side and looked at the light in his hand seriously. There was a little joy in his tone. What do you see? Li Tianlan asked softly. Nothingness. Wang Tianzong said calmly. But it's very real. He could not see the sword either. But between nothingness and reality, what he felt was the purest sword intent. A real sword should be like this. So should martial arts. A real sword should be alive and have a soul. It could perfectly carry anyone and any level of sword energy. The invincible sword. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm. It stands here and doesn't need to be controlled. Its sword energy is already equivalent to a peak invincible realm expert. Li Tianlan's expression became a little strange. Now in the whole dark world, there were only 5 confirmed experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Tianzong deity, Lin Fengting, the master of Samsara Palace, and Arsis. Should this sword of nothingness be added now? If this sword was ranked on the divine list, wouldn't it be ranked above Gu Xingyun? Li Tianlan did not find it funny. Instead, he felt a little cold. If so, what kind of sword was it? Who made it? The sword in nothingness seemed to feel Li Tianlan's mood. The sword light trembled slightly in his hand, with a little grievance and dissatisfaction. Like a child acting coquettishly. Li Tianlan was a little speechless. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath. He also did not know what kind of sword it was, but he was sure that even if the coldness of 9 states was successfully cast with the human emperor, its spirituality would not reach this level. Your Excellency, can you show up? Wang Tianzong looked at the void with a serious expression and asked. His tone was very respectful. Not because of its strength, but because the sword itself was a miracle. With this sword, no weapon in the world could shake its position as the first divine weapon, whether it was the murderous weapon, listen to the sea, or even the coldness of 9 states. The sword in nothingness did not respond, nor did it have any emotion. Wang Tianzong waited quietly. With his current strength, He might be able to try to forcibly control this sword. But what could a sword equivalent to the peak of the invincible realm do even if he controlled it? It did not belong to him. If he really held it in his hand, not only could he not use it, but it was equivalent to carrying a time bomb. The colorful light slightly fluctuated in Li Tianlan's hand. Some sword light wrapped around Wang Tianzong's body, with faint emotions. That emotion was not hostility, killing intent, or disgust. There was intimacy, but with a touch of complexity and helplessness. The sword whistling in the void seemed to be a sigh. All the emotions slowly disappeared, completely converged, and returned to nothingness. At this moment, it was no longer a life, but a sword, a pure sword. The sword was in Li Tianlan's hand. Wherever the long sword pointed, the tip of the sword pointed. Li Tianlan slowly lowered his palm. The seven-colored radiance that filled the sky instantly boiled. In the void, the sword continued to rise, faster and faster, disappearing into the distance in an instant. The seven-colored light slowly dissipated. The wind and rain did not fall for a while. There was no sunlight between the heavens and the earth. It was murky and pure. What do you think? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. He and Wang Tianzong were enemies, but in the field of sword intent, only Li Tianlan was qualified to discuss swordsmanship with Wang Tianzong. Even if they were enemies, they would be lonely when they didn't see each other. Wang Tianzong felt the direction where the sword light disappeared, and was silent for a long time. He thought of the coldness of 9 states cast by the Wang family of Beihai. The coldness of 9 states was not as good as this sword. It was inserted into the spirituality, but it was lacking in the sword qi. This was because compared to the one who had just left, the coldness of the 9 states was only born from the heart. It did not have enough spirituality or sword qi. If he became a chosen one and swept through the dark world with the coldness of the 9 states, when the coldness of the 9 states fully matured, it might not be much weaker than that sword. The most important thing was, Wang Tianzong only wanted a sword. He wanted a sword that could bear his sword intent. The coldness of the 9 states could do it. The other things were no longer important. He shook his head and said slowly, "After all, it's just a foreign object." The constantly converging sword light went all the way to the west, and landed on the West Mountain. The so-called West Mountain was a low hillside that surrounded the Hero Square on several sides. Standing on the hillside, one could clearly see everything on the Hero Square. The master of Samsara Palace, who had been rumored to have fallen, and had never appeared even on the date of death and the trial day, stood on the hillside and looked at Li Tianlan in the distance in silence. Qin Weibai, who was wearing a gray windbreaker, stood side by side with the master of Samsara Palace, looking more and more beautiful. Flaming fire stood behind them, as quiet as a statue. The sword light that kept returning to nothingness was getting closer and closer. In the nothingness, the sword body hovered around the three of them for a moment, and passed by flaming fire. It seemed to hesitate slightly and finally became completely quiet. "It's too early for you to make a move," the master of Samsara Palace said softly. "Have you ever thought that it's not necessarily a good thing to believe in him too early?" "Why not?" Qin Weibai said with a smile. "This kind of timing and occasion is the best." The master of Samsara Palace did not speak for a moment. Her figure was tall and plump. Under the black cloak was an expressionless mask. She was not ugly, but standing in front of Qin Weibai, who was as ethereal as a fairy, she looked ordinary and almost bloated. They were a pair of sisters. When the two stood together, everyone's attention would be attracted by Qin Weibai, and thus ignore the master of Samsara Palace. Even if she was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm, who stood at the peak of the dark world. Qin Weibai looked at her silent figure. Her eyes were in a trance, and she was lost in thought for a moment. "You're not reconciled?" the master of Samsara Palace suddenly said. Her voice sounded a little low under the mask. "No." Qin Weibai's voice became cold. The master of Samsara Palace seemed unwilling to continue this topic. She looked at Li Tianlan in the distance and said blandly, "You want to mold him into a supreme god, but it's too early now. He's not strong enough. A god is perfect and supreme, without any flaws. Now he's still too weak. Have you ever thought that the higher you push him, The more he can't afford any failure? It's true for him, and it's also true for his subordinates. What's the matter? Qin Weibai asked back. Does it matter? Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace took a deep breath. Wang Tianzong deity Lin Fengting, and even me, who isn't stronger than him. The chaos in East Island isn't over yet. Now. Qin Weibai suddenly interrupted the master of Samsara Palace. It's over. At least for him, it's over. The next final battle has nothing to do with him. The master of Samsara Palace couldn't speak for a moment. Qin Weibai took 2 steps forward and opened her hands, as if she was embracing the sky. Her figure was so delicate, so perfect. I could have changed a lot of things, she said softly. Of course, I also changed a lot of things, but I'm not a savior. I just want my man to go higher and make his path easier. From the very beginning, even before the final battle of Chongdao, in our plan, Tianlan wouldn't be in the final battle of Eastern Europe. Tianlan will not be in the final battle in Eastern Europe. He has done a good job in Eastern Europe. What belongs to him is over. But you know him, the master of Samsara Palace said blandly. In the final battle, both you and I will be there. Tianlan won't stay out of it. She looked at Qin Weibai's back, and her voice was as sharp as a knife. You don't have any means to persuade him. So, how are you going to let him leave the battlefield of the final battle? Qin Weibai's figure trembled violently. He could have left. Qin Weibai's voice suddenly sounded a little agitated. If everything goes well, in a few days he will leave with Li Huaxing, return to Zhongzhou State, and go to Tiannan to develop. When he hears the news, it will be too late. But Jiang Shangyu is missing. The master of Samsara Palace said. Whether he intentionally disappeared or not, the direct result of his disappearance is that Li Tianlan can't leave Eastern Europe for the time being. His disappearance directly ruined your plan. Qin Weibai's body trembled slightly. So, how are you going to keep him out of the battlefield? The master of Samsara Palace asked more and more directly. You do it? Or me? In an instant, Qin Weibai's face lost all the blood and became extremely miserable. I said, her voice was light, as if she had lost all her soul. I won't say sorry for the second time in my life. So, the master of Samsara Palace asked. There was silence. The silence seemed to have passed for a moment, but it also seemed to be as long as a lifetime. Qin Weibai's voice finally sounded. I'll do it. The master of Samsara Palace sighed softly with mixed feelings. The snowdance corps in the distance began to leave the square. In sight, there were crowds of people everywhere. The master of Samsara Palace hesitated for a moment, walked to Qin Weibai, and patted her on the shoulder. Qin Weibai lowered her head and no longer looked at Li Tianlan or the snowdance corps. Have you ever thought about what he would be like without you and me in this world? The master of Samsara Palace said softly. Qin Weibai's eyes were in a trance, and she said absent-mindedly, what can he do? Without you and me, there will be others to replace us. If he doesn't meet me, he will still enter the Sky Academy. Maybe there will be no final battle of East Island, but he will still rise quickly in the Sky Academy, and then his identity will be exposed. She said quietly in a sad voice. Then he may enter the Wang family of Beihai because he can't bear the pressure he can't bear at all. He will find his own way to be the chosen one, and sweep the dark world with the divine weapon given to him by the Wang family of Beihai. He will meet Phoenix Pavilion, 1 or 2 women he loves deeply, and they also love him deeply, but they are destined to die with each other. Just like Li Kuangtu, the old things keep reincarnating. He will die under the sword of his woman, and the Li family will disappear completely. His woman may hide her identity, or take revenge for him with his sword. That may be the era of women. The master of Samsara Palace listened to her quietly without saying a word. The former is sad, and the latter is boring. Finally, Qin Weibai concluded. Boring. The master of Samsara Palace's voice was calm. It's really boring. Qin Weibai nodded. Let's go to see Tianlan. The master of Samsara Palace's body hesitated for a moment. Qin Weibai looked down at her clothes. A gray lady's trench coat, a white scarf, a white cotton shirt, black straight pants, and high heels. She never dressed herself up, but any clothes on her had a kind of dazzling brilliance. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said, "Let's change clothes and go." The master of Samsara Palace nodded. "Okay, let's go back to the hotel first. The Manlasai Hotel has been completely cordoned off. It's the place where Wulan State arranged President Li Huaqing to live. I've booked a room in a nearby hotel." Flaming Fire, who had been silent, suddenly became angry. She took a step forward and looked at Qin Weibai. The master of Samsara Palace didn't say anything. Qin Weibai nodded and said casually, "Then let's go there directly." Flaming Fire nodded slightly. The car is already at the foot of the mountain. The three of them slowly went down the mountain along the mountain path. Along the way, Flaming Fire wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Qin Weibai didn't seem to notice Flaming Fire's state. Her steps were light and weak. The master of Samsara Palace quietly reached out and grabbed Qin Weibai's arm. She looked at Flaming Fire and asked aloud, "What do you want to say?" Flaming Fire glanced at the master of Samsara Palace and ignored her. The master of Samsara Palace narrowed her eyes slightly and snorted softly. A black car made in Eastern Europe was parked at the foot of the mountain. The three of them got in the car in silence. Flaming Fire sat in the driver's seat, silent and motionless. Finally, Qin Weibai looked at her and said slowly, "What do you want to ask?" "What clothes do you want to change, boss?" Flaming Fire hesitated for a while and finally asked directly. "Changing clothes is changing clothes. Have you prepared a lot of clothes?" Qin Weibai asked curiously. Flaming Fire turned to look at Qin Weibai's bright and crystal eyes and said stubbornly, "You know what I mean." She paused and continued, "I will never agree." Qin Weibai reached out and tidied the hair in front of Flaming Fire's forehead. She said softly, "Don't think too much." "I didn't think too much." Flaming Fire said quietly, "I just don't agree." She turned to look at the master of Samsara Palace and said with cold eyes, "Why?" The master of Samsara Palace did not speak. Flaming Fire sneered and said, "Do you deserve it?" "Enough." Qin Weibai suddenly opened her mouth and said coldly. Flaming Fire's fierce momentum stagnated for a moment, and finally fell silent. "I don't want to go to the hotel." After a long time, Flaming Fire said softly. For some reason, her eyes were slightly red. "You have to let Tianlan see it." Qin Weibai said softly. She touched Flaming Fire's head and said, "Drive." Flaming Fire was silent. From Mormons to Reki City, they took a private plane and didn't stop. The reason for all of this was actually so simple. It didn't matter whether they missed her or not. The important thing was to let Tianlan see it. Look at her. Look at her. And her. Chapter 554. When Eastern Europe was approaching the end, the final maneuver of the two academies in Zhongzhou State finally came to an end. After the maneuvers, the statistics of credits were handed over to the presidents of the two academies as soon as possible. The presidents of the two academies reported the credits to Kunlun City. After the verification, Kunlun City would distribute a series of rewards and treatments to each force and each young student according to the credits. Then it was the graduation ceremony. The high-level officials and teachers of the two academies would spend a few months summarizing the teaching situation of this year, exchanging experiences, re-rating the strength of each teacher, transferring personnel, rewarding teachers with outstanding achievements in the past 3 years, and formulating the teaching direction and focus of the two academies for the next year. Then it was the annual leave and a short vacation. After the vacation, when the personnel of the two academies were completely stable, the two academies announced the enrollment requirements of the new year. Kunlun City and the Army headquarters jointly issued a document, which was transmitted to the entire military world and the special warfare system. Any young elites who met the enrollment requirements and were interested in entering the two academies would choose the Sky Academy or the Deep Sea Academy. Then the teachers of the two academies would lead teams to various places for the assessment. After the assessment, the new classes of the two academies would officially start again at the end of March or the beginning of April next year, around the Qingming Festival. To some extent, the final result of the last maneuver of the two academies directly affected the direction of the new students' choice and the support of the military and the special warfare system for the two academies. So Zhuang Huayang was very busy. The Sky Academy really shone in this year, and completely left the Deep Sea Academy behind. Li Tianlan's rise directly broke the pattern of the young generation, and even the entire Zhongzhou state experts. The Deep Sea Academy originally had Jiang Shangyu, Dongqing Rushi, and Song Ci. From the beginning, the Deep Sea Academy's glory was far stronger than that of the Sky Academy. But Li Tianlan defeated 3 young chosen ones and mini-elites in one fell swoop in the final maneuver, which also completely shattered the pride of the Deep Sea Academy. From the beginning to the end of the maneuver, the East Emperor Palace only participated in the team maneuver on the first day, and only Li Tianlan participated. But the credits accumulated by the East Emperor Palace had more than twice that of the second place, the 3000 World. The East Emperor Palace was the force of the Sky Academy, and all this was naturally the glory of the Sky Academy. As the Dean of the Sky Academy, within 24 hours after the maneuver, Zhuang Huayang had been commended many times by the parliament, the cabinet, the military, and Kunlun City. After all, the total credits of the Sky Academy in this maneuver had surpassed that of the Deep Sea Academy. With such a brilliant achievement, the Parliament of Zhongzhou State almost unanimously approved the appointment of Zhuang Huayang to continue to serve in the Sky Academy. Zhuang Huayang naturally knew the reason. From this moment on, although he was still the backbone of the academics, he had already stepped on the boat of the East Emperor Palace. On the surface, he stayed in the Sky Academy to commend his achievements. But there was more than one kind of commendation. With his age and military rank, the high-level officials of the army headquarters in Kunlun City had talked to him before, hoping that he could serve in the Ministry of National Defense and serve as the deputy minister after this term. In fact, it was tantamount to giving him an idle job in retirement. Of course, this retirement position was what everyone dreamed of, and it might not be worse than now. However, after thinking for a long time, Zhuang Huayang finally expressed the idea of continuing to shine in the Sky Academy. His care for Li Tianlan was well known. Nowadays, the Academy, the Giant Group, and Sai City were very close, and the core figure was Li Tianlan and the East Emperor Palace. It could be foreseen that as long as Li Tianlan went all the way up in the future, Zhuang Huayang sitting in this position was unlikely to step down. Instead, he would always hold the power of the Sky Academy and attract talents for the East Emperor Palace. The Academy would also intervene in the special warfare system with the rise of the East Emperor Palace's status. The cooperation between the two sides was a complete win-win situation. Zhuang Huayang might have to wait until the East Emperor Palace was strong enough to decide the sensitive position of the Dean of the Sky Academy. But at that time, Li Huaqing had already left the office and gave up the supreme power. The academics, which was in a dormant period, could negotiate with the powerful East Emperor Palace on this issue and find a new direction of cooperation, such as the current governor of Jiangxia, Zhou Yuanshan. Knowing his position clearly, Zhuang Huayang naturally knew what he should do. As soon as the maneuver ended, he sent a notice to the East Emperor Palace and invited them to return to the Sky Academy to confirm the future development direction. This matter could even be said to be the most important thing for Zhuang Huayang. For the East Emperor Palace, it was also extremely important. The sun shone in the spacious office. Zhuang Huayang held a list in his hand and looked at it attentively. Sitting opposite Zhuang Huayang, Li Beitian calmly watched Zhuang Huayang frown. After a long time, Zhuang Huayang put down the list in his hand and said slowly, "You actually want all of these people?" There were thousands of students in the two academies, but there were only hundreds of elites who could really enter the eyes of the major forces. The East Emperor Palace naturally had no right to be picky. As a new force, even with Li Tianlan in charge, the scope of the East Emperor Palace's selection of talents was still extremely narrow. The graduates of the two academies were their biggest market. This market was indeed very large. In the eyes of Kunlun City, there were nearly 100 students who applied to join the East Emperor Palace. In the eyes of Wang Qinglei, this list had already exceeded 100 people. But looking at the entire Sky Academy, this year, there were more than 860 students who wanted to join the East Emperor Palace and had submitted applications to the political departments of the two academies. The East Emperor Palace was also generous enough. They wanted to accept more than 800 people without leaving a single one. Zhuang Huayang was a little worried. He took a deep look at Li Beitian and said slowly, "Do you know what this means?" Li Beitian nodded with a smile. In the case of Li Tianlan in Eastern Europe, he had full authority to represent the East Emperor Palace. This decision was made after many internal discussions and communication with various parties. More than 800 people. This is just the combat capability. The East Emperor Palace accepted them. In fact, it is equivalent to accepting their relatives and even their families. There is no shortage of experts on this list, and they also have vassals around them. So if all of them are counted, the East Emperor Palace has accepted at least more than 1,000 students this time. Including their families, the number of people in the East Emperor Palace will even exceed 5,000. Zhuang Huayang said in a deep voice. Any new force had to develop slowly. Even if it was a big gamble, there must be a limit. The current behavior of the East Emperor Palace was completely crazy. To accept so many people in one breath, it needed great financial resources, future potential, and a stable chain of interests. Now the East Emperor Palace had nothing but potential. Headmaster, we have indeed considered this problem, but at present, it seems that it is not impossible to solve. The new East Emperor Palace will give everyone a huge surprise. Li Beitian said calmly. As for this list, only about 1/10 of the people really enter the headquarters of the East Emperor Palace. The East Emperor Palace will set up a new branch in the near future, and most of the people on the list will develop in the branch. Zhuang Huayang stared at Li Beitian. He even thought that the young man in front of him was crazy. The East Emperor Palace had just been established, and it had not yet stabilized. How could he want to set up a branch? The corner of his mouth moved, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Headmaster, if you have anything to say, you can say it directly. Although we have graduated, we will always be your students. Li Beitian laughed. Zhuang Huayang snorted coldly, stood up, and said, "It's nonsense. The East Emperor Palace is in the limelight now. The most important thing to do at present is to keep a low profile. The East Emperor Palace has accepted so many talents at once. Do you really think that other forces have no temper? Bodhisattva? Well, your foundation is not stable, and you start to set up a branch. What kind of institution is this branch? Who will be responsible? Do you think you don't have enough shortcomings? The new branch is called Nightmare Corps. It is probably a strengthened regiment. The East Emperor Palace is the first in this maneuver. With Tianlan's position, we want to fight for A-class authorization for Nightmare Corps," Li Beitian said. Zhuang Huayang took a deep breath and shook his head with a wry smile. Nightmare Corps was also a special warfare legion. The strengthened regiment would have about 3,000 people, and the commander's military rank was at least a colonel. These were easy to deal with. The key was A-class authorization. There were 4 levels of authorization in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. B-class authorization was common, and could be regarded as the basic and middle level. Most small special warfare agencies were B-class authorization. A-class authorization was already a behemoth. They had the power to expand freely in a certain province. The special operations bureaus of each province were all A-class authorization. Originally, the current status of the East Emperor Palace should also give them A-class authorization. To get A-class authorization, the strength must be at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and the military rank of lieutenant general or above. Li Tianlan was now the marshal of Zhongzhou State. After the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, he returned to China and handed over the position of the commander of the Snowdance Corps, but he was still the marshal. Therefore, the new East Emperor Palace would get S-class authorization, which was on the same level as the regional special warfare headquarters. Its status was equivalent to that of a member of parliament. Above the S-class was the X-class. In the entire Zhongzhou State, only Kunlun City had the X-class authorization, and could expand freely within the territory of Zhongzhou State. In the current state, an S-class authorization was enough for the East Emperor Palace to digest. Li Beitian even wanted an A-class authorization? Let's not talk about whether you can get the A-class authorization. Even if you get it, who in your East Emperor Palace is qualified to be the commander of this Nightmare Corps? Zhuang Huayang asked seriously. Marshal Li can't do it himself, can he? The strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and the military rank of Lieutenant General. Li Beitian was now the second most important person in the East Emperor Palace, but his realm was still some distance from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and his qualifications were not enough to be promoted to Lieutenant General. The Li family, Sai City, and Dongqing clan could provide such people, but it was unlikely to get the A-class authorization with these people. In the entire East Emperor Palace, only Li Wangsheng, the Lieutenant General of Black Tortoise in Zhongzhou State, was barely qualified. But he was just barely qualified. His military rank was enough, but his strength was slightly poor, and the position of the Terracotta Army could not be easily given up. As for the other one, Dongqing Rushi, her strength was enough, but her strength was not strong enough to be promoted as an exception as Li Tianlan's. And to say the least, even if Li Wangsheng and Dongqing Rushi were promoted, their strength was not enough to quell the controversy. At that time, there would be many people who were dissatisfied and challenged. Once they failed, the entire East Emperor Palace would be affected. At present, we have found the candidate for the commander of the Nightmare Corps. He has confirmed that he will join the East Emperor Palace, and I believe that his strength can be promoted and fully recognized by Zhongzhou State. No one will be bored enough to challenge him, Li Beitian said seriously. Zhuang Huayang thought about it with some doubts and asked, "Where is he?" "He is still with Tianlan in Eastern Europe," Li Beitian said. Zhuang Huayang thought about the young expert who was now with Li Tianlan and said uncertainly, "Dongqing Rushi?" Li Beitian shook his head. "Zhuanyuantai, Zhongzhou State, Lin Yuxian, the young master of the Lin clan. Is he qualified?" This chapter is purely coded by mobile phone. There is a power outage at home. We said that there would be no electricity at 10 o'clock. If there are any typos, please bear with it. Chapter 555. There was some doubt in Zhuang Huayang's eyes, but it soon turned into surprise. Li Beiqian's words contained too much information and represented too many things. Lin Clan, Zhuanyuantai, Zhongzhou State. Every word was the key of the key. This was also something that Zhongzhou State had been secretly looking forward to for a long time. The Lin clan lived in seclusion. They were far away in Switzerland, and had almost never interfered in any affairs of the dark world. In this state, the Lin clan, in the era when experts at the peak of the invincible realm could almost represent everything, was absolutely worth the effort of any force to rope in. Zhongzhou State had also tried several times, but the Lin clan had never given any response. Now that Lin Yuxian joined the East Emperor Palace, it was absolutely a good start. He would serve as the commander of the Nightmare Army, so he must become a citizen of Zhongzhou State, and even join the political party of Zhongzhou State. After all, he was the heir of the Lin clan. Even if the Lin clan allowed Lin Yuxian to develop a branch alone, the Lin clan was bound to change its attitude toward Zhongzhou State in the future, because of his relationship with the Lin clan. If a behemoth like the Lin clan supported a country with the same voice, it was actually very troublesome. Support at all costs often meant that the supported country had to pay an unimaginable price. For example, no one could deny the great contribution that the Wang family of Beihai and Zhongzhou State brought to Zhongzhou State. But the existence of the Wang family of Beihai often made Zhongzhou State seem very embarrassed. The young master of the Lin clan joined the East Emperor Palace, and the Lin clan had a very important branch in the country. At some point, if the Lin clan's position leaned toward Zhongzhou State, it would have a huge influence. In the eyes of Zhongzhou State, this was a real win-win situation. No wonder, Zhuang Huayang muttered to himself and suddenly asked with some uncertainty, "What did Lin Yuxian say?" "He has already shown his attitude by going to Eastern Europe with Tianlan. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he couldn't get away from Eastern Europe, he might have come to meet the headmaster in person today," Li Beitian said with a smile. Zhuang Huayang took a deep look at him and didn't say anything. He understood Lin Yuxian's attitude and naturally understood Li Beiqian's subtext. Didn't it mean that if Lin Yuxian was free, he would represent the East Emperor Palace to discuss the list with Zhuang Huayang today? In other words, in the future sequence of the East Emperor Palace, the first was Li Tianlan, and the real second was Lin Yuxian. Judging from Li Baiqian's current attitude, he wasn't dissatisfied with this. There were only a few cores in the East Emperor Palace. After Li Tianlan, it was Li Baiqian and Dongqing Rushi. They were all experts who were likely to break through and enter the invincible realm. Dongqing Rushi would not fight for anything. If Li Baiqian was willing to give up the position of number 2, Ning Qiancheng, who was slightly less talented, and Su Chu would not do anything. Du Hanin belonged to Sai City, and Wang Yuetong was in an awkward position. In this way, as long as Li Baiqian did not fight for it, the core lineup of the East Emperor Palace would be extremely stable in the future. For anyone looking forward to the future of the East Emperor Palace, this was good news. I will communicate with the chief immediately. East Emperor Palace will probably get the authorization of the Nightmare Army at the graduation ceremony. Zhuang Huayang said without hesitation, full of confidence. If the commander of the Nightmare Army was not Lin Yuxian, he would not be so confident, and he might not even report it to the higher-ups. But if it was Lin Yuxian, all the problems would be solved. Zhongzhou State was completely willing to make an exception to promote Lin Yuxian. With the status of the Lin clan in the Dark World, Zhongzhou State was even willing to pay more. Kunlun City naturally would not like this appointment, but it was impossible to oppose it openly, because it was useless even if it did. If Gu Xingyan really dared to say no, the whole Zhongzhou State, not to mention the counselors and directors, even the wealthy families who had various cooperation with the Lin clan would teach him what to focus on the overall situation. Li Baiqian laughed. Before he came, he knew this would be the result. He pointed to the list in Zhuang Huayang's hand and said, "This? I'll arrange it." Zhuang Huayang waved his hand and looked at the list in his hand. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." Among the hundreds of names, the oldest was already 31 years old, and the weakest had crossed the ice-condensing realm, which was the standard for graduation from the East Emperor Palace. Many of them were not geniuses, but there was still room for improvement. Conservatively speaking, the worst potential could reach the peak of the ice-condensing realm. From the ice-condensing realm to the fire-flaming realm, to the thunder-shocking realm, and to the half-step invincible realm. The starting point of the East Emperor Palace was unimaginably high, and it had formed its own talent echelon. If Li Tianlan could break through to the invincible realm in a short time, the entire East Emperor Palace would become pivotal in the Dark World. Even now, as long as Li Tianlan came back, the East Emperor Palace could be regarded as a force that no one in Zhongzhou State could ignore. The most important thing was that it was just the beginning. 3 years later, with Li Tianlan's steady rise in Zhongzhou State, how many people would want to join the East Emperor Palace when the graduates of the two academies graduated again? And what realm would the people who joined the East Emperor Palace be in 3 years? Zhuang Huayang was a little emotional. Vaguely, he seemed to see a surging tide rolling over from a distance, with the general trend of crushing everything, constantly subverting all the orders of the old era. The younger generation will surpass us in time, he sighed softly. Headmaster, you flatter me. Li Baiqian smiled implicitly. If there's nothing else, I should go back. How could there be nothing else? Zhuang Huayang said helplessly. At the graduation ceremony, you have to speak on behalf of the East Emperor Palace. Marshal Li can't spare time to come back. Don't you support him? Speak. Li Baiqian was stunned and then laughed. It's not my business. I'm not the one to speak on behalf of the East Emperor Palace at the graduation ceremony. Then who is it? Zhuang Huayang asked curiously. It's Yuetong. Li Baiqian said calmly. The corner of Zhuang Huayang's mouth twitched violently, as if he couldn't believe it. When the Sword Emperor of the Wang family of Beihai and Li Tianlan were at loggerheads in Eastern Europe, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai spoke on behalf of Li Tianlan. Is it Wang Yuetong? He couldn't help but ask again. Li Baiqian shook his head and said, No, it's Yuetong. Wang Yuetong was climbing the mountain. The smooth mountain road of Mount Dibbing was getting farther and farther behind her. She walked quietly and didn't take a car. Instead, she observed the beautiful scenery around Mount Dibbing step by step. She didn't leave Mount Dibbing for a long time, but when she came back this time, she felt as if a lifetime had passed. She was a little thinner, but she looked more beautiful. She used to be stubborn and lively, but now she was strong and calm. In a short time, she seemed to have undergone a complete transformation. In other words, it was a leap from immaturity to maturity. She passed the mountainside and approached the top. There was an antique pavilion at the bottom of the mountain. In the summer when flowers and plants were flourishing, the pavilion was located among the flowers and plants, vicissitudes and elegance. Summer Solstice was standing in the pavilion and looking at Wang Yuetong. Her eyes were full of helplessness and pity. Wang Yuetong's footsteps trembled slightly. She stopped and looked at Summer Solstice without saying anything. "Why don't you take a car up?" Summer Solstice came over and tidied her daughter's hair, asking softly. Wang Yuetong didn't say anything but just whispered, "Mom, have you thought it through?" Summer Solstice said softly, "If you have, come back. I'll ask someone to help you tidy up your room." Wang Yuetong shook her head and whispered, "I just want to come back to see you, Mom. I'll go back later." No matter where you are, you can only use it when you arrive at Mount Dibbing. Summer Solstice's voice was gentle and soft, but extremely firm. Wang Yuetong bit her lip and didn't speak. Summer Solstice didn't seem to want to embarrass her daughter. She sighed softly, touched her short hair and whispered, "Do you miss me?" "Yes. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." "Is there something else?" "Of course, if you want me to ask your father to let Tianlong go, you'd better not ask. At this time I can't persuade him, and I'm in no position to persuade him." "No." Wang Yuetong shook her head and smiled bitterly. "When I left here last time, I made up my mind. No matter what, I won't embarrass my father in the future, nor will I embarrass him." Summer Solstice looked at Wang Yuetong quietly, and there was some understanding in her eyes. Neither side embarrassed her, so she was the only one who was embarrassed. "Don't you feel wronged?" Summer Solstice asked softly. Wang Yuetong shook her head and said softly, "No." Summer Solstice was in a daze. She thought of the trial day in Eastern Europe. That night, even when the Snowdance Corps collapsed and Li Tianlan's life was at stake, Wang Yuetong didn't make a sound. She had never called Summer Solstice or Wang Tianzong. That night, Eastern Europe was turned upside down. That night, Zhongzhou State was turbulent. That night, Tiannan felt like a year. What was Wang Yuetong thinking about that night? Tianlan won't die this time. With his current position, at least in Eastern Europe this time, your father can't kill him. But silly girl, do you know that President Li Huaqing brought nearly 60 families to Eastern Europe this time? Most of them belong to the giant group. Even if a few people from other groups want to get benefits in Eastern Europe, they must get Li Tianlan's approval. Among them, there are people from the Special Warfare Group. He will contact more and more people, and his foundation will become more and more stable. In any case, this is what your father doesn't want to see. He can't do anything to Tianlan, but it doesn't mean that he can't do anything to those people. Summer Solstice said softly. Wang Yuetong's face turned pale for a moment, and then she shook her head and said, "Mom, I'm not here to listen to this." Xia Ji sighed again and said helplessly, "Well, what do you want to tell me?" "I'm here for the graduation ceremony of the Sky Academy," Wang Yuetong said softly. Summer Solstice's face changed slightly. "At the graduation ceremony, Yuetong will speak on behalf of East Emperor Palace." Wang Yuetong's eyes were clear and firm. "Yuetong?" Summer Solstice narrowed her eyes. Wang Yuetong agreed, and became more determined. Summer Solstice sighed softly. Yuetong's surname was neither Wang nor Li. Had he lost his surname after all? "Have you ever thought that if this goes on one day, you will have nowhere to go?" Summer Solstice said softly. Wang Yuetong shook her head and said softly, "No." Summer Solstice smiled bitterly. When she was about to speak, the entire Mount Dibbing trembled for no reason. It was not an earthquake. The magnificent Mount Dibbing trembled for a moment, and then returned to normal. In an instant, the entire Mount Dibbing was filled with sword energy. Endless sword energy stirred the space and came back from all directions on the ground. In the core area of the top of Mount Dibbing, a space completely condensed by sword energy suddenly rushed to the sky. The world seemed to become dim. All the colors on Mount Dibbing faded. Sword light lit up in the majestic sword energy. There was only black and white. The black and white sword light enveloped the entire Mount Dibbing. The sky and the earth all became hazy for a while. This is... Wang Yuetong was absent-minded for a moment. This sword is called Coldness of 9 States. Summer Solstice's voice was faint. The black and white sword light flickered slightly. Under the sword light, a flame suddenly rose up. The flame was not blazing, but it kept burning. The color was extremely bright. Even in the black and white sword light, it was still extremely strong. For the first time, there was surprise in Summer Solstice's eyes. "It's Shengxiao," she said. He broke through. End of this chapter. Chapter 556. Li Huaqing's time was indeed tight. Therefore, as soon as the memorial service ended, Zhongzhou State had already determined the time for the welcome dinner with Wulan State. This dinner, which was destined to divide up most of the property of Wulan State, and even the 5 Eastern European countries, would be held tomorrow evening. At this time, it was enough for many important figures in Eastern Europe to come to Reki City, and it was also enough for Zhongzhou State and Wulan State to sign a series of agreements. This was the main purpose of Li Huaqing's visit to Wulan State. The dinner party had to be held after the signing of the agreement. Only in this way could Zhongzhou State be sure of what it had got, and then negotiate with all the powerful families in Eastern Europe. Therefore, not only Li Huaqing was pressed for time, but Wulan State was also pressed for time. They had to finalize all the agreements on the last day. The agreements that were about to be signed largely represented the future of Wulan State. Rick seemed to be prepared. When the Snowdance Corps retreated, he had already arranged for someone to lead the delegation of Zhongzhou State to the hotel. As for Li Tianlan, Li Huaqing, and Wang Tianzong, they went directly to the office of the president, or to the place where Wang Tianzong was imprisoned. The new location of the office of the president will be about 9 kilometers away. The original location of the Caesar Hotel will become the new office of the president. This square will be expanded. I have communicated with Commander Cheng Huaining of the Arctic Ocean Command and reported to Minister Dongcheng. Within 3 months, the Arctic Ocean Command will support the Snowdance Corps with a batch of armaments. With them here, Wulan State will be stable in the future. The black Hongqi was driving on the highway. Li Tianlan looked at the parade square outside the window and reported in a calm tone. At this time, Riker was not in the car. Li Zhonghu drove in person, so he could speak freely. Therefore, Li Tianlan had no scruples and said straightforwardly, "Zhongzhou State can be more ruthless." On this point, Riker has enough psychological preparation. After the agreement is signed, there will be some details. I will talk to Riker then. Li Huaqing patted his shoulder and said gently, "You've worked hard." Li Tianlan shook his head and said quietly, "The soldiers of the Snowdance Corps are working hard." Of course. Li Huaqing nodded. Zhongzhou State will commend them collectively and improve their treatment. As for the martyrs who sacrificed themselves, I will inform the military headquarters to increase their compensation. We can't let these heroes die with worry. Listening to Li Huaqing's habitual official tone, Li Tianlan was silent for a while and did not speak. What about the rotation of the Snowdance Corps? Wang Tianzong, who was silent, suddenly kept his composure. He asked. Li Huaqing's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong. He said blandly, "The current plan is that the rotation time is 3 years. The members of the Snowdance Corps are real iron-blooded men. 3 years later, they will return home." Li Zhonghu suddenly opened his mouth and said, "We have consulted all the experts in advance. Of a warrior. In my opinion, they are willing to stay here for the next 3 years. What about 3 years later?" Wang Tianzong continued asking. Li Tianlan glanced at him, smiled, and said nothing. The meaning was obvious. Since Li Tianlan, Reki City would naturally be in the hands of the Li family. The Li family did not mind other people coming to take a share, but they must abide by the order of the Li family. Only the military power maintained the order. More than 10,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps were stationed here, fully equipped, which was equivalent to tens of thousands of troops. They would be stationed here for 3 years. As for what troops would come after 3 years, it was something that Li Tianlan should consider. It had nothing to do with Wang Tianzong. It was only 3 years. With Li Tianlan's current momentum, could he really come up with an army that could replace the Snowdance Corps after 3 years if he held Reki City tightly? It's good for young people to be confident, Wang Tianzong said slowly. Li Tianlan quietly waited for Wang Tianzong's but Wang Tianzong, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He did not go on, so he nodded and said, yes. A part of the Beihai Corps will be stationed in Eastern Europe in the near future, and the garrison area will probably be concentrated in Snow Country. If the Snowdance Corps is under pressure, Marshal Li can temporarily mobilize the Beihai Corps to be stationed in Reki City. Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. Li Huaqing frowned and did not speak. The Beihai Corps would be stationed in Snow Country? Snow Country was the world's hegemon. Although their experience was backward, they still maintained the world's top military strength. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, all the superpowers had stayed in Snow Country, but no one was willing to fight in Snow Country. Now the chaos in Eastern Europe was about to end. Wang Tianzong was going to attack Snow Country. Take action? Perhaps Snow Country itself did not know that the Beihai Corps was going to be stationed in Snow Country, right? Are you sure? Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. Yes. Wang Tianzong was calm and simple. It was just one word, but he said it with great confidence. If you need support, just say it, Your Majesty. Although the Snowdance Corps is small, we will not be stingy with support. Wang Tianzong said faintly. Marshal Li, take care of yourself first. Even if there is no war in Wulan State in the future, it will be extremely lively. If you need to borrow troops, just come to me. Li Tianlan sneered and did not speak. Both of you are the pillars of Zhongzhou State. There is no need to make many things so rigid. Zhongzhou State is very big and can accommodate the Wang family of Beihai. Naturally, there is also the soil for the development of the Li family. Especially now, both of you are outside Zhongzhou State. I hope you two can still make a fool of yourself. I hope you two can still focus on the overall situation. Li Huaqing had a headache. Before the chaos in Eastern Europe, if everything was not obvious, the conflict between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai had become extremely acute. Li Huaqing came to Reki City this time mainly for the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. But in private, he also wanted to coordinate the relationship between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong, Li Tianlan. The current Sword Emperor and the future East Emperor were the present and the future of Zhongzhou State. In the future, the conflict between the two would continue to intensify, which was a good thing for everyone outside Zhongzhou State. But for Zhongzhou State, no one wanted to see it. Before Li Huaqing left, he received a lot of very important calls, including the leaders of the Southeast Group, the Giant Group, and even the senior executives of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group. The grievances between the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family were difficult to completely solve, but countless people hoped that Li Huaqing could control the conflict between the two within a certain range. But now? Wang Tianzong was going to attack Snow Country. But his purpose was obviously not just for Snow Country. Once he took down Snow Country and stationed a large number of troops in Snow Country, the Snowdance Corps and the Beihai Corps in Snow Country were bound to have constant conflicts in the future. The positions of the two sides would also make the soldiers of both sides want to annex the other. Just like what the two people said just now, the support seemed very generous. But thinking about it, whether it was the Snowdance Corps or the Beihai Corps, if they encountered problems in Eastern Europe, they would not ask for help from the other side even if they died in battle. It was easy to invite a god in, but difficult to send him away. The strength of Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong was not equal. Limited to Eastern Europe, their status was already equal. Once their armies entered each other's territory, if one side insisted on not leaving, the other side really had no good way. Li Huaqing also had no good way. The Wang family of Beihai had its own development path. He could not persuade Wang Tianzong to give up Snow Country, and he was reluctant to do so. But he was also reluctant to let Li Tianlan give up Wulan State. The final result could only be that the Beihai Corps and the Snowdance Corps stayed in Eastern Europe to fight openly and secretly. Now the only thing Li Huaqing could do was to persuade these two chosen one to really take the overall situation into account. The car slowly turned and stopped in the square in front of the office of the president. Li Huaqing got out of the car and suddenly asked, "How is Tribulation's injury?" It was also a big deal. For this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. For any country, the physical condition of an invincible realm expert in its country was a big deal, and his words could be regarded as a reminder to Wang Tianzong. The new commander of the Snowdance Corps recommended by Li Tianlan was Tribulation. Tribulation was no match for Wang Tianzong. But Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan were the same. They could not stay in Eastern Europe for a long time. If Wang Tianzong left, no matter who was stationed in Snow Country, they would not be a match for Tribulation. Dijiang might be able to stop Tribulation, but the Border Control Corps was obviously more important. Wang Tianzong would not leave him in Eastern Europe. As long as he left, the Snowdance Corps would obviously have more confidence than the Beihai Corps. Moreover, Tribulation's qualifications and abilities were enough. Even the Southeast Group could not find any reason to object to him replacing Li Tianlan. Marshal Uncle's injury is fine. Li Tianlan did not say it clearly. In fact, Tribulation's injury was very serious, but it was not really fatal. Most of his injuries came from the loss of strength caused by his entanglement with Paul. As for other injuries, although they were also serious, he had regained his ability to move. After that, he would recover very quickly. Even if Li Tianlan had to leave in a short time, he could rest assured. In his current state, he is fully competent for the position of commander of the Snowdance Corps. Tribulation is naturally reassuring to be the marshal. Reki City may not be peaceful in the future. There is no clue about Jiang Shangyu's disappearance. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for Marshal Li to leave at this time. Wang Tianzong said blandly. It was also a reminder. Even if the general placed here by the Wang family of Beihai was no match for Tribulation, there was still Jiang Shangyu in the Snowdance Corps. And compared with Gu Xingyun, who was afraid that Li Tianlan had troops in Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong did not want Li Tianlan to go to Tiannan. Otherwise, he would not have hesitated to break through until now. I won't leave until I find Jiang Shangyu, Li Tianlan said blandly. They slowly walked into the messy office of the president, and into the room where Wang Tianzong temporarily lived. Although it's good to talk here, the hotel is better. Tianzong, Tianlan, what happened before was just a misunderstanding. Now that it's over, it's okay to talk it over. Wulan State is fully capable of arranging a residence for Tianzong that is more suitable for his identity. Li Huaqing said with a chuckle, but his eyes were looking at Li Tianlan. On the trial day, the news that he had imprisoned Wang Tianzong had spread throughout Zhongzhou State, which made his prestige soar. Now that the matter was over, he continued to lock Wang Tianzong up. It was meaningless. Sure enough, Li Tianlan nodded and said, I have no problem with that. No need. Wang Tianzong laughed. He reached out and poured a cup of tea for Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan respectively. He said slowly, It's good here. It's quiet, and no one will disturb me when I practice calligraphy. I'm very satisfied with it. He paused and said with a smile, Anyway, I won't live for a long time. I'll stay here. How long? How long? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. His eyes were a little dignified. Wang Tianzong was about to speak when his cell phone suddenly rang. He took out his cell phone and looked at it. It was a text message from Summer Solstice. Wang Tianzong looked down at the text message. Quietly, Li Tianlan suddenly noticed that every inch of space around him had become extremely sharp and awe-inspiring. Wang Tianzong seemed to be sharper than before. He glanced at Li Tianlan and said blandly, 3 days, that's enough. Li Tianlan's pupils instantly contracted to the extreme. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 557. After coming out of Wang Tianzong's residence, accompanied by Li Tianlan, Li Huaqing visited the Snowdance Corps stationed on the parade square. President Li Huaqing listened carefully to the reports of the two deputy marshals, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, and met with Li Zhonghu, Sun Mengran, and other high-level members of the Snowdance Corps. Li Huaqing discussed the future garrison plan of the Snowdance Corps with the senior management of the Snowdance Corps. He affirmed the achievements of the Snowdance Corps in Eastern Europe this time, wrote down some requirements of the Snowdance Corps about armaments, and said that he would implement them as soon as possible after returning home. Then, accompanied by a group of high-level officials, President Li Huaqing visited the wounded and soldiers of the Snowdance Corps, and talked cordially with the representatives of the soldiers. It was not until dusk fell and Riker came to pick him up that Li Huaqing returned to the Manlisai Hotel where he stayed. Li Tianlan stayed and had dinner in the station. After dinner, Tribulation, who had not recovered from his injury but was breathing more peacefully, made a cup of tea. He looked at Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "What's the matter? Say it." Li Tianlan pondered over the wording. Tribulation was not in a hurry and waited quietly. Since Li Tianlan did not go back with Li Huaqing, he knew that he must have something to do. Is it hard to fight for the position of the Snowdance Corps? That won't happen. Li Tianlan shook his head. There were not many people in Zhongzhou State who could beat Tribulation in terms of qualifications and strength, or even none. Moreover, he had the full support of the giant group. As long as Tribulation nodded, he would become the new and irreplaceable marshal. Wang Tianzong is about to break through. He thought about it and finally decided to tell the truth. His tone was simple and calm, as if he was talking about a trivial matter. Tribulation's hand, which was holding the teacup, suddenly shook. The tea spilled on his hand. It was scalding hot, but he didn't seem to feel it. He looked at Li Tianlan with a stunned expression. Wang Tianzong. Breakthrough. When these two phrases were put together, it was like a raging wolf, surging and suffocating. Tribulation didn't even know what to say for a moment. The entire dark world knew that Wang Tianzong's realm had completely surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. But he had been in the invincible realm for many years. After years of accumulation, he took a step forward. Countless people thought that Wang Tianzong was lucky. How long has it been? Was he going to break through again? Could he really break through again after surpassing the peak of the invincible realm? Is he going to break through? With some uncertainty, Tribulation repeated it again. Li Tianlan nodded. Thinking about Wang Tianzong's words, he said in a low voice, "Within 3 days at the earliest and 3 days at the latest." Tribulation's face suddenly became gloomy. Even the time could be determined. This was not a possibility at all, but an absolute certainty. The corner of his mouth twitched. He wanted to say something, but he suddenly felt lost. The general trend in Reki City had been settled, and so had the general trend in the entire Eastern Europe. But if Wang Tianzong broke through at this time, what did they do before count for? Once Wang Tianzong broke through again, he alone would be the general trend of the entire dark world. The whole room seemed to be filled with an extremely oppressive force. Tribulation took a deep breath with difficulty and said dryly, "You broke through after surpassing the half-step invincible realm. What realm is that?" Li Tianlan smiled bitterly and said nothing. In fact, it didn't matter what the realm above the invincible realm was called. What mattered was that in this era where the peak force was only the peak of the invincible realm, Wang Tianzong broke through again, and was the real chosen one. Heaven's pride was unparalleled. Let's call it supreme? Li Tianlan said with some ridicule. Tribulation glanced at him and suddenly said, "What's Wang Tianzong's plan? He won't touch Reki City for the time being, and he can't. But with the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, how can he be willing to get nothing in Eastern Europe? If they let go of Reki City, he will definitely seize other places in Eastern Europe, at least Snow Country." Li Tianlan whispered, "The Beihai Corps has begun to lurk in Snow Country." Tribulation took a deep breath and asked again, "What about the president?" Li Tianlan's eyes were a little indifferent, and he said calmly, "When we were chatting, the president hoped that the Beihai Corps and the Snowdance Corps could help each other in Eastern Europe in the future." Tribulation stood up with a sneer, held the teacup in his hand, and said in a cold voice, "What does that mean?" Li Tianlan thought for a moment and said, "It's probably literal." Tribulation took 2 steps back and forth, looked at the wind and rain outside, and said slowly, "Is this neutral?" "Yes, it must be neutral." Li Tianlan did not speak. This was a very normal thing. Even a fool knew that once the Beihai Corps gained a foothold in Snow Country, it would be impossible to coexist peacefully with the Snowdance Corps. The Snowdance Corps was now a sharp sword in Li Tianlan's hand. The East Emperor Palace had just started. Sai City had Situt Songyue, the giant group had Dongqing Wudi, and the Samsara Palace had the master of Samsara Palace. Forget about the purgatory of Heaven capital, at least the Li family still had Li Honghe. Only the Snowdance Corps could be completely affected by Li Tianlan's will, and not be shaken at all. Once Wang Tianzong broke through, even if he didn't do it himself, with the influence of the chosen one in the world, he would let the Beihai Corps swallow the Snowdance Corps, which was equivalent to cutting off one of Li Tianlan's arms. In such a matter, it was obvious that Li Huaqing did not give Li Tianlan the support he wanted. Even with Wang Tianzong's breakthrough, the attitude of the academics seemed to have changed. It was hard to say now. Tribulation stopped, looked at Li Tianlan and said, "Tell me your plan." "I want to go north of Sai City," Li Tianlan said without hesitation. Li Tianlan spoke without hesitation. His tone was short, but it carried a touch of absolute sharpness, like an unsheathed sword stained with blood. "Go north." Tribulation raised his eyebrows. Sai City was in the northernmost part of Zhongzhou state. If they continued north, they would reach Eastern Europe. "Go north." Li Tianlan nodded. This was the first time that he had made a suggestion on the future development of Sai City, since he became the young governor of Sai City. Perhaps from this moment on he had officially integrated into the role of one of the core figures of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state. Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan with some seriousness. It was the first time that he had made such a suggestion. Sai City must pay full attention to it. Otherwise, what kind of young governor was Li Tianlan? He sat opposite Li Tianlan and said seriously, "Tell me what you think." "The only force I can think of is Sai City. Only Sai City can completely stabilize the 5 countries in Eastern Europe." Li Tianlan said slowly, "We can't afford to lose the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. They are our most important foundation and bargaining chips in the future. To be honest, I'm afraid." He was really a little afraid. He was afraid of losing everything, of feeling ashamed of the Li family, and of not being able to bear the responsibility he was now carrying. He was afraid of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong, who stood in the position of the chosen one, put unparalleled pressure on him. With the addition of the Wang family of Beihai, the sense of oppression even made him dare not breathe. Under such circumstances, there was Jiang Shangyu, who was secretive in the Snowdance Corps. According to the current intelligence from Zhongzhou State and Samsara Palace, Jiang Shangyu was likely to have established contact with the Wang family of Beihai. This was normal. Otherwise, he should not have fallen out with Kunlun City in any case. However, in this way, the Wang family of Beihai had put another powerful figure in the Snowdance Corps, and he was much more powerful than Chen Qingwan. So Li Tianlan felt that tribulation was not enough here. He wanted to put the whole Sai City in the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. There were several famous assassins in the dark world in Sai City. Their almost peak-level assassination ability could be a deterrent both inside and outside the city. Situt Songyue, Tribulation, and Qin Shilai were 3 invincible realm experts. When the situation in Wulan State was completely stable, the 3 of them would unite to open up the passage from Wulan State to Western Europe. The Dark Knights would also exert their strength to show the dark power of Northern Europe and cooperate with the Snowdance Corps. At that time, Raphael would be added, which was equivalent to another invincible realm expert. The Qin clan and Rekvia were deeply rooted. Li Tianlan held Rieker in his hand. In this way, Li Tianlan could be completely relieved. With such a force, as long as Wang Tianzong did not take action personally, Sai City could completely cope with the pressure brought by the Wang family of Beihai. "It's useless for you to only tell me about this." Tribulation thought for a while, and said slowly, "I will talk to Auntie in detail tonight." Li Tianlan nodded. "In addition, I will also communicate with Minister Dongqing and Secretary Bai." Sai City's overall move to the north involved many aspects. At least, the interests in the northeast could not be given up in vain. Now Sai City seemed to have given up everything in Guangdong and Longjiang province, but they were in charge of Liaodong, and their influence in the entire Northeast was unparalleled. Sai City left the Northeast, and all the things were complicated. Some interests could not be given away in vain. For the Dongqing clan, Li Tianlan was one of their own. For Sai City, Li Tianlan was also one of their own. But for the Dongqing clan and Sai City, they were just allies. Li Tianlan had to coordinate all the relationships. Only when both sides had a satisfactory answer could Sai City move. Tribulation nodded and said, "I personally have no opinion." "Then I'll implement it as soon as possible." Li Tianlan stood up. Tribulation nodded and said, "I'll arrange a car to take you back." "No need." Li Tianlan shook his head. "It's windy and rainy. I'm just sober." He walked out of the door and looked at Tribulation. Tribulation stood where he was, his eyes gentle and indifferent. In a trance, Li Tianlan could not remember what this martial uncle looked like when he first met him. But he knew that Tribulation should not be like this. He should be the strongest assassin in the dark world, not the commander stationed in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan's mouth moved and he whispered, "Martial uncle, thank you." Tribulation smiled and shook his head. There was no sharpness, no coldness, only calmness. Li Tianlan turned and walked into the wind and rain, feeling complicated. Under the general trend, everyone's fate would change more or less. Now the old general trend had not fallen, and the new general trend was about to change. No one could see clearly what would happen after Wang Tianzong broke through. What Li Tianlan could do was to use the resources he had now to create a relatively favorable situation for himself. He walked quietly in the wind and rain. The wind and rain fell and evaporated silently when they were about to fall on him. All kinds of thoughts began to emerge in his mind. Some were bold, some were unrealistic, some seemed possible, some were pessimistic, and some were depressed. Li Tianlan let his thoughts spread. Walking in the wind and rain, he seemed more and more ethereal. The night completely enveloped the world. There seemed to be a light in front. There were some faint noises. A familiar and almost unforgettable fragrance drifted over, faint and faint. Li Tianlan sniffed subconsciously and raised his head in surprise. Qin Weibai was standing in front of him with a smile. Beside her, Flaming Fire was holding an umbrella, expressionless and emotionless. Li Tianlan was a little surprised, but before he had time to speak, an incomparably cheerful and cordial emotion suddenly came over. Colorful rays of light formed in front of him and enveloped his entire body. Li Tianlan's back sank slightly. It was as if a heavy sword had fallen on his back. The feeling was heavy but broad. Li Tianlan didn't feel tired at all. It was a feeling that was almost connected by blood. He and the sword seemed to be a whole. In other words, the sword seemed to be a part of his body. It was so harmonious and harmonious. The colorful light that enveloped him gradually converged and turned into an imperceptible halo. Standing in the halo, Li Tianlan looked calm and quiet, but there was a kind of transcendent elegance about him. Li Tianlan subconsciously reached out his hand. His palm touched a part of the sword hilt. The black hilt looked deep and profound. He finally saw what the sword looked like, even though he only saw a part of the hilt. "This is," he asked softly, a little confused. "It likes you very much." Qin Weibai smiled softly and said, "This is the sword I mentioned. It can be worthy of your future, the sword that really belongs to the chosen one." Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. He could feel the vastness and purity of this sword. The Haran sword intent that was enough to tear the sky had no trace, but it was extremely powerful. With this sword in hand, even if Li Tianlan didn't enter the invincible realm, he could be called invincible. If this sword cooperated with him, with his sword intent and the abundant sword energy of this sword, he could completely reproduce the glory on the night of the trial day, or even more powerful. In other words, with this sword in Li Tianlan's hand, as long as Wang Tianzong didn't break through, he could fight with Wang Tianzong, or even fight to the death. Li Tianlan felt the meekness and joy from behind, thinking, "Is this an opportunity? The sword in the square is a little too much." Li Tianlan thought about something and said subconsciously, "No." Qin Weibai blinked and said softly, "You deserve everything it gives you. Its master must be the real invincible chosen one, and should also be a god in everyone's heart." strong wind and heavy rain. She seemed to be a little cold and gently wrapped the gray windbreaker around her. Li Tianlong glanced at her. Gray windbreaker, white scarf, white shirt, black straight pants and high heels. Simple, with a coolness that did not match the weather in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlong took off his marshal's uniform and put it on her. He took the opportunity to hold her body in his arms, bit her pink ear, and whispered, "Thank you. I like this sword very much." The invisible giant sword behind him became more and more excited. Qin Weibai's body was trembling slightly, and she murmured, "Itchy." Li Tianlong kissed her ear again. Qin Weibai let out a soft hum, and her delicate body became softer and softer. She subconsciously wanted to get into his arms. Li Tianlong smiled, suppressed the charming thoughts in his heart and whispered, "You're not leaving this time, are you?" Qin Weibai was silent in his arms for a while, and whispered, Tomorrow I'm going to Mormon's." Li Tianlong frowned. As if afraid that he would be angry, Qin Weibai put her arms around his neck and whispered, "I'll accompany you tonight. You can do whatever you want." After a pause, her perfect and flawless face blushed, but she was still cold. She said in a soft voice, "As many times as you want." Li Tianlong's breathing suddenly quickened, and his hand holding Qin Weibai also slightly tightened. "Boss, it's time to go up. The palace master is still waiting for you," Flaming Fire suddenly said. Her voice was extremely cold, like the frozen ice in the polar region. Li Tianlong glanced at Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire was also looking at him. There was a strange glint in her eyes. "Yes, let's go and find my sister." Qin Weibai gently pushed Li Tianlong and said softly, "The palace master is here?" Li Tianlong was stunned. Since he entered the secular world, the Samsara Palace had been closely related to him. He had met many high-level supermasters of the Samsara Palace, and the one who had been in touch with him was Qin Weibai. But he had only seen the master of the Samsara Palace once in a video. If she was in Eastern Europe, this would be the first time Li Tianlong met her. Li Tianlong felt a little complicated. "It's in a nearby hotel. Let's go." Qin Weibai took Li Tianlong into a black car on the side of the road. Li Tianlong glanced at the Manlasai Hotel in front of him through the window, and did not speak. Qin Weibai sat next to him, and held his hand in an extremely gentle manner. "The clothes don't suit you very well," Li Tianlong suddenly said. "They look old." As soon as the words came out, he was stunned. In his mind, Qin Weibai had always been truly flawless. There was no such thing as fitting clothes. Any clothes she wore were a real scenery. In all fairness, Qin Weibai could still be said to be devastatingly beautiful in a gray windbreaker. But this color made her look too mature. Li Tianlong always felt that it was a little strange. He didn't even know why he was so harsh on her. "Really?" Qin Weibai looked down at her clothes and whispered, "Then I won't wear it anymore." She took off the windbreaker and put it on the seat. She hesitated and leaned into Li Tianlong's arms. "It looks much better this way." Li Tianlong lowered his head and praised. Qin Weibai looked at where his eyes fell, and gently rolled her eyes at him. She pursed her lips and said with a smile, "You're so annoying." Li Tianlong wrapped his arms around her waist and whispered, "What's the matter with Mormons?" "Just some small things. It'll be solved soon." Qin Weibai leaned into his arms and felt his heartbeat. Her eyes were a little dazed and she whispered, "When Mormons' matter is solved, I'll go to Tiannan with you, okay? I'll leave Samsara Palace and stay with you all day. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I can give birth to a child for you. Enrich and Yuetong." Her bright eyes gradually became blurred and full of longing. Li Tianlong's expression also softened and he whispered, "Okay, when it's over, I'll take you to Tiannan." He paused and whispered, "It'll be over soon." The colorful flowing light gradually flowed behind him and flowed to his arm. It gradually slid down and covered his whole palm. The light gradually condensed and finally turned into a pair of black gloves on Li Tianlong's palm. The corners of Li Tianlong's mouth twitched, and he felt a little helpless. His palm was gradually moving up and was about to touch the warm and proud peaks, but there was a glove on his palm. The glove was really thick. Li Tianlong looked at the glove thoughtfully. It seemed to feel Li Tianlong's mood. The light on the glove flickered with some grievance, and then it turned into a black ring again. Li Tianlan stroked his palm with satisfaction and said with a smile, "What's the name of this sword?" Qin Weibai's body slightly stiffened, and she subconsciously glanced at Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire drove the car attentively, holding the steering wheel tightly. Qin Weibai moved her body and whispered, "It doesn't matter what it was called before. Now it's your sword, and it's better for you to give it a name." "Name?" Flaming Fire, who was driving, suddenly said. "Does a name mean anything?" Li Tianlan looked at her in surprise and said, "What do you mean?" Flaming Fire was silent for a while, and then said indifferently, "It means nothing." She drove the car and said no more. A long time ago, when she first followed Qin Weibai, she realized a truth. But it was not until today that she completely understood it. The so-called name, the so-called identity. Yours, mine, hers, and its. No matter what the name was. It was meaningless. Chapter 558. The three-star hotel where the master of Samsara Palace stayed was not big. The only advantage was that it was close to the Manlasai Hotel, so it was very convenient to travel. After parking the car in front of the extremely exquisite hotel, Flaming Fire finally said, "Here we are." "You're not getting off?" Li Tianlan asked. "I still have something to do." Flaming Fire sat motionless in the car and said calmly. Subconsciously, Li Tianlan felt a little strange, but for a moment he could not tell what was wrong. Before he could figure it out, Qin Weibai had already gently held his hand. Li Tianlan smiled, got out of the car, and walked into the hotel with Qin Weibai. When they were about to enter the door, he looked back. Flaming Fire's black car was approaching a crossroads ahead. Li Tianlan was deep in thought. In the end, he followed Qin Weibai into the hotel. The top floor, the only luxurious suite. The mysterious master of Samsara Palace lived here. For Li Tianlan, it was hard for him to describe the position of the master of Samsara Palace in his heart. It was a kind of estrangement that he had never really met, but there was a closeness between them. There was also gratitude as if he had been reborn, and some vague respect. All the emotions gathered together, and became extremely complicated. Samsara Palace Master, Qin Weibai, and even the 12 super masters. Everyone had done a lot for him. There were some things that Li Tianlan already knew, some he didn't know, and some he had already noticed. It seemed that since he entered the secular world, the Samsara Palace, which had been mysterious and low-key, had actually been revolving around him. There was Qin Weibai's deep love for him, and naturally, there was also the laissez-faire attitude of the master of Samsara Palace when she was silent. This favor was so heavy that Li Tianlan even felt a little scared and ashamed to accept it. The elevator was going up slowly. Li Tianlan carefully tidied up his clothes and suppressed all the thoughts in his mind. He could feel the extremely strong heartbeat in his body. The huge vitality of the immortality potion was still working. This immortality came from the master of Samsara Palace. A dark green jade pendant on his neck trembled slightly as the elevator went up. That was the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld, which also came from the master of Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan's thoughts became more and more complicated. Qin Weibai had rushed to his side like a moth to a flame, and then the whole Samsara Palace had spared no effort to support him. Would there be an answer to all of this today? The elevator stopped and the metal doors parted. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and led Qin Weibai out of the elevator. The door to the luxurious suite was open, and it was quiet inside. Qin Weibai stood in front of the door and knocked. "Come in." A calm and wooden voice rang out in the room. Qin Weibai walked in first and pulled Li Tianlan to the living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room were huge. In his line of sight, a tall and plump figure was sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, quietly watching the scenery outside. There was no TV on in the living room, no lights, no air conditioner, no tea and no paintings. There was only the woman sitting in front of the window and the wind and rain outside. In the past. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. For a long time, this place seemed to have been deathly silent and dull. Qin Weibai lightened her steps and said softly, "Sister, Tianlan is here." Li Tianlan stared blankly at the black figure in his sight. bowed slightly and said, "Greetings, Palace Master." Qin Weibai quietly pinched Li Tianlan, her eyes filled with hidden bitterness. Li Tianlan was stunned for a moment before he realized that he had said something wrong. He coughed and said with slight embarrassment, "Sister." The master of Samsara Palace turned her head and glanced at him. There was darkness between them, but their eyes were extremely bright. Qin Weibai walked aside and turned on the light in the living room. The master of Samsara Palace's expression was calm. She nodded slightly and said, "Sit down." Li Tianlan sat down and didn't know what to say for a moment. "You have something on your mind?" The master of Samsara Palace suddenly said softly. Li Tianlan glanced at her and was a little stunned. Although she was a little plump, the outline of her face was extremely soft, and he could vaguely see the delicacy she used to have. Li Tianlan didn't even dare to guess the age of such a master of Samsara Palace. It was possible that she was 30, 40, or 50. He scratched his head and said with a smile, "I'm a little nervous seeing you for the first time." "It's not this." The master of Samsara Palace looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said softly. Her eyes were so light that Li Tianlan couldn't see any emotion at all. It seemed that all emotions were merged together, and the strongest was calmness. "You have something on your mind." She repeated her words. Qin Weibai brought a cup of tea to Li Tianlan and sat beside him. She looked at him strangely. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, then shook his head and said, "It's a small matter." The chosen one in the dark world is not a small matter. The master of Samsara Palace said softly in a self-mocking voice. Li Tianlan's hand holding the teacup trembled slightly. He raised his head and said, "You know all about it?" The master of Samsara Palace sat by the French window and said softly with a faint sense of loss in her voice, "I've been waiting for this day for a long time." She looked at Li Tianlan and asked, "Are you afraid?" "Yes," Li Tianlan answered simply, but he was thinking about the words of the master of Samsara Palace. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. He was waiting for Wang Tianzong's breakthrough? He was a little uncertain and said directly, "If there is no accident, Wang Tianzong will break through in 3 days. He is now ready and can step over that threshold at any time." "I'm afraid you're right." The master of Samsara Palace had no reaction to Wang Tianzong's news. She just said softly, "What I don't want to hear the most is that you're not afraid. He is the chosen one, invincible in the world. Anyone in front of him should feel afraid. This is a respect for invincibility and martial arts, as well as for oneself. Tianlan, in your current position, the most important thing is to be calm and rational. Passion and impulse are the most useless things. I don't know if I will have the chance to say these words to you in the future. It's rare for us to meet, so I'll just say it all at once." She stood up and sat on the sofa opposite Li Tianlan. She said softly, "As a person in a high position, you can't easily talk about life and death. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." After a pause, she continued, "People are most likely to let themselves down." She glanced at Qin Weibai intentionally or unintentionally and continued, "I've experienced a lot in my life, and all of them are not difficult for me. Do you know what's the most difficult thing?" "What?" Li Tianlan asked. "Being yourself." The master of Samsara Palace said calmly, "This is the most difficult thing." Li Tianlan thought of a lot in an instant. He knew too little about the master of Samsara Palace, but he also knew a few major things she had done in recent years. As a person in a high position, she couldn't easily talk about life and death. What was she thinking when the Samsara Palace destroyed the headquarters of Night Spirit more than 3 years ago? And the master of Samsara Palace forcibly took the murderous weapon against Blue Sky Underworld. What was she thinking when he was seriously injured more than 3 years ago? And the master of Samsara Palace led the 12 supermasters straight into Mount Dibbing and pulled out their swords to face Wang Tianzong. What was she thinking when the final battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago? The master of Samsara Palace challenged Gu Xingyun. What was she when the headquarters of Samsara Palace was destroyed by Wang Tianzong's sword a few months ago? In retrospect, everything the master of Samsara Palace had done seemed to be related to him. "What about you?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. He looked straight into the eyes of the master of Samsara Palace. Have you ever let yourself down? I don't know. The master of Samsara Palace's eyes were blank for a moment, and she said softly, I've done a lot of things that can't be evaluated. So being yourself is the most difficult thing, and not letting yourself down is the most difficult thing. Li Tianlan's heart trembled for no reason. He lowered his head and drank his tea in silence. The master of Samsara Palace suddenly raised her hand. Li Tianlan's fingers loosened slightly. A colorful light lit up in the palm of the master of Samsara Palace. I'm not surprised that Wang Tianzong will break through. But now it seems that this is not something you should face. I will block the Sword Emperor in this state for you. So don't be afraid, and don't worry about anything. The master of Samsara Palace said calmly, I want to borrow this sword. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said softly, That's the chosen one. I told you that my sister also has a sword, Qin Weibai suddenly said. She has been preparing for this sword for a long time. Although it is only the power of one sword, it can reproduce the peak state of the chosen one. No matter how much preparation a person at the peak of the invincible realm prepares, he can't reach this level, Li Tianlan said quietly. So this sword is the key. The master of Samsara Palace said quietly. This is the sword of the chosen one. Its owner used to be the chosen one, so this sword naturally has the sword intent and sword energy of the chosen one. I will arrange for people to form a sword formation created by the chosen one, and urge the remaining sword intent of this sword to the extreme. This is not enough, Li Tianlan said. If this sword has the power of the chosen one when it is urged to the extreme, then the so-called chosen one is too worthless. It's not enough, but it's not far from it. The master of Samsara Palace looked at him and said, I will make up for the lack. It's enough for me to exchange all my martial arts for one sword. One person for one sword. Li Tianlan suddenly stood up and said, No. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 559. To some extent, before Wang Tianzong officially broke through, Li Tianlan could be said to be the person who knew the combat power of the chosen one best. His sword intent was already in the most perfect state. Simulating the sword energy with sword intent, he could totally imagine how powerful the chosen one's sword was. Because of this, he was so scared when facing Wang Tianzong, who was about to break through. The suffocating pressure was like a shadow covering the whole sky. There was no light, only the deepest darkness and majesty. In this state, Wang Tianzong's every move made him extremely nervous. Li Tianlan had long known that the master of Samsara Palace had a sword move. That was the strongest trump card of the Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan had also estimated the power of this sword move, and the conclusion was very clear. The power of this sword move should be roughly between the peak of the invincible realm and the half-step supreme master. Only in this way could the whole dark world be afraid. But he did not expect that he still underestimated this sword move. The strongest trump card of the master of Samsara Palace was the chosen one's sword move. And it was the chosen one who was in the peak state. The power of this sword move had almost exceeded the limit of Li Tianlan's imagination. No matter how amazing the power of the void divine weapon emitting colorful light was, no matter how amazing the sword formation created by the chosen one was, the master of Samsara Palace had to pay a price for this sword move. Putting Wang Tianzong aside, you certainly can't bear this sword move. Li Tianlan looked into the eyes of the master of Samsara Palace, and said seriously. The master of Samsara Palace was also looking at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were calm and tranquil. After a long time, a faint smile bloomed on her soft face. You care about me? I said, you can't bear this sword move. Li Tianlan did not know why he suddenly became extremely agitated. He could not tell where this feeling came from, but the instinct that was close to intuition kept reminding him that he could not let the master of Samsara Palace use this sword move. Otherwise, he was likely to regret it for the rest of his life. The increasingly clear intuition was almost roaring nonstop, occupying all of Li Tianlan's consciousness. His heart was beating wildly, and the worry and fear in his subconscious completely surged out, so much so that he forgot to respect the master of Samsara Palace. I can't bear it, neither can Wang Tianzong. The master of Samsara Palace looked at Li Tianlan and said in a soft voice, "There are many results after this sword move. The best result is that Wang Tianzong and I die together. The worst result is that I die and Wang Tianzong is seriously injured. But even the worst result is good enough for you." Her voice was steady and soft. In fact, Li Tianlan was wrong. He was not the only one who knew about the heavenly suns. In other words, in this era where no one had ever seen a heavenly sun, only the master of Samsara Palace had seen the power that could change the color of heaven and earth. She might not know Wang Tianzong, but it didn't matter. Wang Tianzong could definitely break through. It didn't matter. Because in any case, he firmly believed that the chosen one she met could not be stronger than Wang Tianzong after the breakthrough. But after the breakthrough, Wang Tianzong could not be stronger than the real chosen one she had met. The two sides were evenly matched. She was confident that she could truly replicate that pinnacle sword. Therefore, whether the result was the best or the worst, it was actually not bad. She did not care about life and death. What did it matter to her? "This is not what I want," Li Tianlan said. He suddenly felt a little powerless. He was very clear about the consequences of all this. Everything was in the open. If he became the chosen one, there was no way for him to let anyone replicate his sword unscathed. The chosen one represented absolute majesty, absolute supremacy, and absolute supremacy. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Dominance over others. How could such a sword be replicated? Even with so many conditions, the master of Samsara Palace had to pay the price. "But this is what you want," Qin Weibai said softly. The emotions in her eyes changed, and the crystal light was like the twinkling starry sky. "Why?" Li Tianlan asked. Qin Weibai wanted to say something. Li Tianlan suddenly glanced at her and shook his head. He looked straight at the master of Samsara Palace and asked, "Why?" "It has something to do with you, and it has nothing to do with you." The master of Samsara Palace laughed softly. Her eyes became softer, but with a little stubbornness and sadness. "The biggest reason is that I want to give myself an ending. Do you like this ending?" Li Tianlan sneered, but panic and coldness kept spreading in his body. His breathing was a little shaky. "You still don't understand. It's not a matter of whether I like it or not, but the ending should be like this. My fate is like this," the master of Samsara Palace said softly. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He was grateful to the master of Samsara Palace and respected her. But to put it bluntly, they were not familiar with each other. Today was the first time they met officially. He did not know why his emotions were so violent. He closed his eyes. After a long time he said coldly, "I don't believe in destiny." There seemed to be some emotions in the master of Samsara Palace's soft eyes for a moment, and they became dazed and desperate. The room fell silent for a moment. Li Tianlan forced himself to calm down. After a while he said softly, "I need to know the reason why the Samsara Palace desperately fought against Wang Tianzong. You just said that people in high positions can't talk about life and death easily." "I did say that," the master of Samsara Palace said softly, "but if there is no Samsara Palace, I will naturally not be in a high position. The Samsara Palace has actually done everything it can do by existing to this day. Next, there is no need for it to exist. When things in Eastern Europe are over, Little Bai will go back to Tiannan with you. All the preparations have been made there. It will be your real sky. With Little Bai helping you, I can rest assured." Li Tianlan frowned and looked at the master of Samsara Palace in silence. "The chaos in Eastern Europe was caused by the Samsara Palace, so I have always been able to grasp the general direction of the chaos. Tianlan, now you have done everything you should do. Wang Tianzong's breakthrough is not what you should care about. The final battle is also not your business. All grievances will be settled in the final battle. As for the future, it will be a new era. Isn't that good? No matter how good the era is, if you can't see it, what's the point for you?" Li Tianlan said coldly. "I don't deserve to see the era that is too good." The master of Samsara Palace smiled brightly, but a little sadly. "So you are going to die?" Li Tianlan looked at the master of Samsara Palace and laughed at himself. "And you are going to die for me?" What's the reason? The master of Samsara Palace was silent for a while, then slowly said, The reason? Just take it that I owe you and pay you back. You don't owe me anything. All the negative emotions in Li Tianlan's heart broke out completely, and his voice was cold. Before today, you were just a name I heard from others. We didn't even meet. What can you owe me? Do you still remember Dongqing Huangtu? The master of Samsara Palace suddenly asked. Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. Of course, he remembered Dongqing Huangtu. In fact, out of some curiosity, he had been looking for clues about Dongqing Huangtu, but all the clues he got pointed to one problem. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. I remember, he said, but this person doesn't exist at all and he shouldn't exist. If he really doesn't exist, how can there be you? The master of Samsara Palace's voice was fleeting, but in Li Tianlan's ears, it was like a clap of thunder. Li Tianlan's face suddenly turned pale. He gritted his teeth and said, What do you mean? Nothing. The master of Samsara Palace said softly, It's just that for me, what has existed can't be denied. He is the chosen one, so he naturally existed. Li Tianlan subconsciously glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai had been silent. Her perfect and delicate face seemed to be transparent in the light. He remembered that Qin Weibai had talked about Dongqing Huangtu for the first time that day. He was besieged by several invincible realm experts, interfered by countless thundershocking realm experts, and drowned by murderous weapons and a sea of people at the same time. Corpses were everywhere, and blood flowed like a river. He was besieged to death by 6 invincible realm experts. Li Tianlan asked. To be exact, there were 3 murderous weapons and 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm. One of them could barely be regarded as the chosen one, but his state was damaged. The master of Samsara Palace said. Even Li Tianlan, who thought he knew the chosen one very well, was speechless for a long time at this time. 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Not to mention that one of them was a chosen one in an incomplete state. Even if there were only 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm, they could sweep everything in this era. Now in the whole dark world, there were no more than 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm that could be confirmed. Not to mention 3 murderous weapons and a sea of people. The most important thing was that he still remembered what Qin Weibai had said. In such a siege, Dongqing Huangtu died in a sneak attack. At that time he still hadn't used his sword. That was a sneak attack from the woman he loved deeply, and also loved deeply. If it hadn't been for that sword, the final result would be hard to say. Every time he heard about it, Li Tianlan felt nothing but shock in his heart. Dongqing Huangtu, is he really dead? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Of course he is dead. The master of Samsara Palace sighed softly. Li Tianlan nodded and said, What does this have to do with me? I can't pay back what I owe him, but I can't watch you continue to struggle in this era. There are some things that are the same to pay back to you. The master of Samsara Palace said blandly. What do you owe him? Li Tianlan was suddenly a little curious. If the master of Samsara Palace was paying back a debt, why would she pay it back to him? A debt that could make a peak of the invincible realm pay with his life. One could imagine how heavy it was. The master of Samsara Palace didn't say anything. Li Tianlan glanced at her and said, What does Dongqing Huangtu have to do with me? The master of Samsara Palace still didn't say anything. Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai had calmed down. At this time, she was blinking at him with an innocent face. It was obvious that she didn't know. Li Tianlan thought about it and simply changed the angle. The existence of Dongqing Huangtu was too vague. The clues he had were not enough to directly find out the person who seemed to have a close relationship with him. So he asked directly, Who killed Dongqing Huangtu back then? The master of Samsara Palace was silent. It was a long time. In the almost frozen time, she finally looked up at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were calm, but her voice seemed to pass through a desert invisibly, becoming extremely hoarse and dry. It was me, the master of Samsara Palace said. I killed him. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. That you're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.